On the cold winter evening of February 27, 1943, a team of 9 Norwegian commandos arrive at the Norsk hydroelectric plant. Their mission: sabotage the Nazis' heavy water production, which is vital to Hitler and his Nazis creating an atomic bomb.
Gunnerside is a story that shows the dedication that people during the Second World War had to the cause.
We weren't talking about a weapon of the ordinary sort. This was something which was extraordinary. This was something which would change the direction of history.
This is one of the most important weapon production facilities in the entirety of Nazi Germany.
Germany gaining access to this heavy water or to the technology of the heavy water plant would have been a disaster.
In 1911 in Norway, they built the Vemork hydroelectric plant, which was a massive, massive facility.
Initially, we know it's there as a fertilization factory, as a hydroelectric facility, but the byproduct of which, heavy water, has become the raison d'etre of the plant. And this scientific gold mine, really, for want of a better expression, is, of course, courtesy of the know-how of several Norwegian scientists.
Scientists in the early 1930s discovered that Vemork's facility's byproduct is heavy water, a form of water with a unique atomic structure and properties which can be used in the production of nuclear power and weapons.
It's really another route to it. Instead of using graphite as a motoring element, it involves a deuterium oxide or heavy water. And the whole design there is to control the process of fission so that it doesn't go boom.
Harnessing something that's potentially fatal on a macro scale, with this heavy water being the catalyst for that, this alternative isotope of hydrogen.
Leif Tronstad, a Norwegian scientist, is a celebrated scientist, and he's the brilliant mind behind the idea of the heavy water process.
The head of Norsk Hydro enlists Tronstad to design a new building at the Vemork plant, dedicated to producing heavy water on an industrial scale. Around the same time, a seismic shift in Europe is about to happen, as Germany elects a new leader.
Hitler assumes power in 1933.
Hitler's Nazi regime is brutal.
Almost immediately, they begin to root out any kind of opposition that they feel is political or social.
As the grip of the regime tightens, many scientists, particularly Jewish, flee the country to pursue their work beyond the Nazi grasp.
Scientific minds, when they leave a country, it's often considered a brain drain. So the country is losing their brain or their ability to innovate or advance technology, science, research.
Germany becomes inhospitable for so many scientists, particularly these Jewish scientists, and somebody like Albert Einstein does have to leave so that he can continue to not only be a scientist, but just live his life.
Despite many bright minds fleeing the country, those loyal to the Nazi regime stay behind to continue their work. A number of scientists working on the development of nuclear energy make a revolutionary yet terrifying discovery that could give Hitler the ultimate weapon. But they were missing one key element. Meanwhile, Tronstad's designs at Vemork become a reality. And with the new 8-story plant complete, the station now has a designated heavy water production site. French and German scientists expressed their interest in obtaining large quantities for their nuclear energy programs.
Everyone who is in the region wants access to the water because it's so necessary.
Harnessing something that's potentially fatal on a macro scale, with this heavy water being the catalyst for that.
German policies became increasingly hostile towards Jews, homosexuals, and disabled people during the mid to late 1930s. Ideals of racial superiority and ultranationalism start to become more and more prevalent throughout the country.
As early as 1935, they passed the Nuremberg race laws. It prohibits interracial marriage and relationships. It prohibits other non-Aryan races or groups of people from holding jobs in the law and medicine and academia.
In March of 1938, the Nazis annexed neighboring Austria, an early sign of their true expansionist ambitions. Later that year, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann make the breakthrough discovery of nuclear fission at their laboratory in Berlin.
These are the men who identify nuclear fission, this reaction that demonstrates or shows the way forward in terms of nuclear energy. And what do you need that for? You need that for the creation of a bomb.
Once they have that knowledge of how to create the energy, the next step in terms of using it is actually very quick.
News about the nuclear experiments in Germany travels quickly across Europe. French Nobel Prize-winning scientist Frédéric Joliot-Curie writes a letter to his Soviet colleague, alerting him of the Germans' discovery. The news also reaches Niels Bohr, a leading Danish scientist who is preparing to leave on a trip to the United States. Once arriving in New York City, he shares this news with prominent American scientists, sparking the beginning of the American nuclear energy program.
Since the news of what could be done with the heavy water had become common scientific knowledge, every intelligence agency was interested and was actively perhaps pursuing some plan of gaining access to that heavy water.
Within the span of less than a year, each major power begins to ramp up their nuclear research and experiments, recognizing the great potential of harnessing nuclear energy. In September 1939, not long after the race to harness nuclear energy, Germany's expansionist ambitions enter their next phase.
Hitler invades Poland and the ball game begins. Poland is the trigger. A lot of people did not want to go to war because they remembered the First World War. But because Poland was invaded, Britain, France, they have to fight back.
As Europe descends into war, the Nazis continue their pursuit to harness nuclear energy and develop a nuclear weapon. The French government recognizes the importance of the heavy water at the Vermerk facility in Norway and begins attempts to smuggle the heavy water out of Norway.
The French recognize how important nuclear energy is and how powerful it is. So they, of course, don't want Germany to have access to it.
So in an interesting collaboration, prominent French scientists are working with the French intelligence service in trying to identify where the heavy water is being produced and get it out of Norway.
The French intelligence services approaches Jacques Allier, who, before the war, worked at the bank that helped finance the project to build the hydroelectric plant in Norway. Because of his connections, they assigned him the task of getting the heavy water out of Norway, but time was ticking.
Norway is a country that has many proud scientific advancements. Norway's an industrial innovator, a manufacturing innovator.
Norway also was sort of a reservoir of natural resources.
There's a huge number of reasons why Norway is targeted really early on. For a start, it's got absolutely crucial ports. It's Atlantic facing. If you want to win the battle at the Atlantic, you need access to their ports. You also need access to their airfields. So on the geographical front, in terms of winning a strategic war across that Atlantic facing perimeter, you need Norway.
All this makes it an even more compelling target for Germany.
French intelligence service member Jacques Allier flies to Norway with a fake passport and a fake name to meet with the director of Norsk Hydro.
They had enough foresight to realize the Germans were hell-bent on getting an atomic bomb. So they were keen on getting the heavy water out of the Norwegian hydroelectric plant before the Nazi invasion.
Once in Norway, Allier secures all the heavy water, 180 kilos worth. But he fears the Germans might be onto their plans. In order to avoid capture, Allier books 2 separate flights, one with the heavy water to Scotland, and another as a diversion to Amsterdam. The Germans chose to force down the wrong plane.
We've got the heavy water, all 180 kilograms, out of Norway, you know, and it's on the road. It's moving faster than Rommel's panzers. But the problem is, this is just a temporary setback for the Germans.
As the heavy water is secretly smuggled into France, the Nazis continue their invasion of Europe.
Germany invaded Norway in April of 1940.
The conquest of Norway by Germany tends to be seen as pretty rapid, but it does take some time to happen. And Norwegian resistance is the reason why it does take some time.
As thousands of German soldiers are deployed across the country, Norwegians put up a fierce fight. Leading some of the resistance is Leif Tronstad, the scientist who helped develop the heavy water process at Vermerk. Despite the efforts of the Norwegians, they cannot hold off the German advance.
Germany, by June of 1940, is firmly in control of Norway, including the hydroelectric plant.
Having quickly gained the upper hand, the Germans continue their aggression and launch their campaign against France, only 1 month after the invasion of Norway.
Prime Minister Daladier and his military advisors think that they can hold any two-front war which may come out of this push into Poland by Germany.
The French retreat, both mentally and physically, to the Maginot Line, which is this extended network of fortifications along the Franco-German frontier.
The French, having underestimated their enemy, are overwhelmed by the onslaught of Germans pouring into their country. As the Germans begin their march to Paris, Curie worries that the stolen heavy water, hidden in France, will fall into the Nazis' hands. When it becomes clear that France cannot hold off on the Germans, Joliot-Curie and Jacques Allier decide to move the heavy water from France to England.
The problem, of course, is France is overrun and Paris is taken over by the Nazis.
Fortunately, Allier avoids Paris, and the heavy water is met in Bordeaux by a British cargo ship and is safely smuggled to England. Although both Norway and France have now fallen to the Nazi regime, the Norwegian scientist Leif Tronstad is not ready to give up.
Before the Norwegian government flees for England, before Tronstad, the great scientist, flees, they establish a resistance movement and an intelligence network around Norway. So even though Tronstad and the king and others are in exile in England, they have resources on the ground.
So Leif Tronstad knows a lot about what's going on in the plant. He has the ins and outs. He's basically created an underground spy network of his own with him at the head of this spy network. He's keeping the British informed.
So the Norwegian resistance monitoring what's happening at the plant is important, one, so that they know what's going on, that they can keep track of what the Germans are doing, but they can also report back to allies in other countries.
With his spy network, Tronstad is able to provide British intelligence constant information on the Nazis' activities at the plant.
In a war like the Second World War, information is so key at all levels. So the more information you have about what the other side is doing, the better you can plan and the better you can create your own strategies moving forward for how you want to proceed.
The Norwegian High Command in England is very important to the understanding of the resistance movement in Norway.
Once in exile, Leif Tronstad and the Norwegian High Command work closely with the British SOE, known as Special Operations Executive.
Special Operations Executive is basically counterintelligence, insurgency inside of a foreign country. They assist with resistance movements in country, for example, Norway and France.
Having had to withdraw his troops from France after the Nazis' rapid invasion, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill recognizes the potential of the SOE.
For Winston Churchill, something like the SOE is a great way to hit back at the Nazis without having to worry about invasion at the time.
Essentially functioning as an underground army, the SOE is primarily made up of civilian volunteers. One of the key groups in the SOE is known as Company Linge, which consists of mainly Norwegians who fled to England after the German invasion of Norway.
Of course people would volunteer. Their nations had already capitulated. There was no national army to join. So to escape to London, to fight some force, to join some force which would fight the Nazis, would be something which would be on the top of the mind of many of these people.
As the Nazis tighten their grip on the occupied nations of Europe, the Allies continue their nuclear research. American scientists at the University of California and Columbia University are working on various methods of harnessing nuclear power. Recognizing the potential and urgency in utilizing this great new source of energy, the British in 1941 released the Maud Report, which contains plans for producing a nuclear bomb.
So there's a real rush for them to develop a capacity. That's articulated by 1940 in the possibility of developing a uranium-based weapon.
American intelligence was now trying to beef up and meet the threat that they now have on what would become a two-front war.
December 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, and the Americans enter the war.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Only a month after the U.S. is attacked and officially enters the war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt gives his approval to his science advisor for the construction of an atomic bomb. This marks the start of the Manhattan Project.
So it only takes about a month, a little over a month, for Franklin Roosevelt to give the green light on the Manhattan Project.
By early 1942, it's clear to the Allies that the Nazis are hyper-focused on harnessing nuclear energy.
The Norwegian Resistance and Intelligence Network that Tronstad helps to develop, they're providing regular updates to him while he's in England. One of the most disturbing is that Germany has dedicated itself to ramping up the production of heavy water in the hydroelectric plant.
The Germans start seriously focusing on the production of not just heavy water. They establish a uranium club. They're looking at all the different possible ways enriching uranium. They're looking at the production of these isotopes. They're looking at heavy water. They are not closing down any options.
After receiving the concerning reports coming out of Norway, Leif Tronstad suggests a small targeted operation to stop the Nazis' heavy water production. His report lands on the desk of the British Prime Minister.
Winston Churchill decides in 1942 that Vemork is a key target. It is where the heavy water is produced for the atomic weapons.
So the German operations at Vemork are a threat to the Allies. There's no question about that.
So the organization that really takes the lead in trying to prevent Germany from getting the heavy water and from trying to sabotage this hydroelectric plant is the SOE, that's the Special Operations Executive.
In the meantime, conditions in Norway are getting worse. In October 1942, the Nazis begin rounding up Jews in Norway. More than a third of Norway's 2,100 Jews were deported to death camps during the war. Tronstad and other Norwegian resistant members are desperate to do something for their country.
So yet another tragedy is the construction of concentration camps, followed by the mass construction of concentration camps. There were a number of camps, Dachau, Auschwitz, and others that had 10, 20, hundreds of satellite camps. By 1942, the complexion of the war was changing. On the Eastern Front, Hitler planned the invasion of the Soviet Union, an ambitious, if ever there was one, strategy. Operation Barbarossa, but that would not work out.
In February 1943, the Germans suffer a major defeat on the Eastern Front at Stalingrad. With over 100,000 casualties, this loss reveals that Germans are not invincible. Although things looked bad on the Eastern Front, the Germans were getting closer to developing a weapon that could change all that.
They want more of it. They want almost unlimited amounts of heavy water.
They're bound and determined to get an atomic bomb.
Recognizing the dangers of allowing the Nazis' production of heavy water to continue, the Allies are desperate to stop them. Once planning for the attack on the Vermerk plant begins, Tronstad insists on a small targeted attack rather than a bombing rate.
His greatest concern is that the Allies would simply bomb the area. And in doing so, he pointed out, importantly, that it probably wouldn't do the damage that you imagine.
Despite Tronstad's insistence on a small targeted attack, he's overruled, and British soldiers begin training for a mission called Operation Freshman.
Now, how do you best eliminate a plant that's hard to reach? It's sitting at the bottom of an 8-story reinforced building. It's surrounded by Norwegian civilians, and as a bombing target is at best unlikely. The thinking is, well, you'll send in an elite task force with gliders.
Halifax bombers take off from England, and they're towing these Horsa gliders.
Throughout the war, the Allies successfully utilized gliders on various commando operations, specifically for infiltrating behind enemy lines.
Gliders are a very scary thing when you're on the inside of them. When the glider is pulled from basically its tow plane, it is on its own.
The problem is, number one, it's a long flight to Norway. Number two, the weather is horrible.
And these gliders crash on impact and kill some of the men on board. The survivors are found by the Germans, and they are all killed.
At that time, German soldiers had an order to kill any enemies that were involved with commando operations.
So that means every SOE man is killed on this raid. That means the gliders are ineffective against the Axis in that point. And that also means the Germans understand that Britain sees something in this plant.
Preventing the Germans from gaining access to the heavy water was so important that a few setbacks would not have deterred people. Even losing the element of surprise now just means you have to plan differently.
After a disastrous first attempt, the SOE turns to leave Tronstad and Company Linge to lead the next attack. This mission is given the name Operation Gunnerside.
Tronstad is the perfect person to try to disrupt the plans at Vemork. He knows it better than anybody else. He is the one who you would want to be in charge of this operation. He knows exactly what the plant is capable of, but he also knows every nook and cranny of the space. So he can best come up with a plan to disrupt what the Germans are trying to do.
To pull off this daring mission, Leif Tronstad handpicks a small team of Norwegian patriots who, like him, fled to England after the Nazi occupation of Norway. The Gunnerside team is led by 23-year-old Joachim Raunberg. He's joined by Klaus Hellberg, a 24-year-old who had grown up in the area around Vemurk and worked as a tour guide in the surrounding mountains prior to the war. As well as Knut Hauklid, Frederick Kaiser, Birger Stromsheim, and other members of the explosives team.
They are not formerly military trained men. They're even better than that. They are a hybrid. They are physically fit, they are young, and they have extraordinary powers of motivation because they are local and this is their patch and they want to protect it.
And they are trying to fight back against the Nazis for their country where this takes place. That makes it even more personal.
Having an intimate knowledge of the Vemurk facility, Tronstad proposes that the team target the heavy water cylinders located in the plant's basement.
Tronstad knows the hydroelectric plant. So if the French, if the British, if the Americans, if the Allies are trying to get into and sabotage this plant, Tronstad becomes invaluable.
Tronstad suggests they blow up the heavy water cylinders with explosives to ensure they halt the Nazis' heavy water production. The team will then escape to Sweden.
If you want precision, you have to have precise information. This kind of information could only be provided through reconnaissance photos.
You need highly skilled intelligence to understand the way in, the way out, and where things are located inside the building.
The documents provided by Norwegian resistance at Vemurk reveal that 18 cylinders need to be destroyed. With the massive increase in heavy water production, each one of these cylinders will be filled to the brim.
Every one of the cylinders housing this water needs to be taken out.
Therefore, the commandos have to go through some rigorous training. They're practicing forging rivers. They're practicing mountain climbing. They're camping, they're hiking. Their physical fitness requirements are extraordinary.
They do reconnaissance in the woods, they do code and cipher, they're taught how to read each other's communications, they're taught how to use guns, how to use metal cutters, they are taught how to climb rock faces, they already know how to ski. In many respects, they are, if you like, your Renaissance fighters, because they don't just hold a gun and do close combat fighting, but they have what's up here, knowledge of the local area, and ability to outsmart the enemy.
Before the official operation begins, a few of the Gunnerside team members are sent to the Norwegian mountain wilderness surrounding Vemurk to survey and prepare for the attack.
The whole mission kicks off on February 16th, 1943, as 6 Norwegians parachute onto the Norwegian countryside.
Time is of the essence. With every passing day, the Germans are ramping up and producing more and more heavy water.
The Operation Gunnerside team parachute into the Telemark region of Norway, into an area far away from any German patrol points. Their first task is to rendezvous with their teammates who arrived months earlier and are waiting for them in a cabin.
So these men who just parachuted into Norway have to traverse 60 kilometers of land to get to the cabin. This is nothing easy. This is not like taking a walk in the park.
The cabin where the Gunnerside team will begin their mission is located on the Hardangervidda Plateau. Legends say that this mountain plateau grows so cold that it freezes flames in a fire.
Most of the hardship was up on the plateau getting there, where there really weren't any options, where the blizzard locked them in. What else were they going to do?
At this stage of the mission, the most important equipment they have are skis.
Skiing is synonymous with Norway.
If there were non-skiers on that team, they would have perished.
Once the team arrives at the cabin, they're hit with a massive blizzard.
Landing in the middle of a blizzard, you have to shelter in place, because if you go out into the snow in a blizzard and you don't have really any wayfinding markers, it is a death trap.
The bad weather is a delay they could do without. The clock is ticking. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Americans continue with their nuclear research at an unprecedented pace.
The Americans have multiple facilities, secret and semi-secret facilities around the country to develop this, from a big processing plant for uranium in the mountains of Tennessee to the University of Chicago, where some of the world's greatest physicists were gathering to work on the next steps in developing an atomic bomb.
With Manhattan successfully underway, the Americans and the British become increasingly convinced that they'll be the first to develop a military capacity, a bomb for this, and that's exactly what happens.
The Allies have no idea how close the Germans are to developing their own atomic bomb. So it's essential for Operation Gunnerside to be a success. After holding up in the cabin for a week, the weather clears, and the Gunnerside team begin their journey.
We hear about raids in the modern era, going in and finding a target, maybe being there on the ground for 2 to 4 hours and then being extracted. This raid takes well over a week.
During their training with the SOE, the Gunnerside team was shown diagrams and life-size replicas of the heavy water cylinders. They decide the best way to destroy them are with plastic explosives.
So the use of plastic explosives allows them to carry it throughout this whole operation, making the entire thing easier because they are lighter, they're more portable.
These explosives also allow for a precise and targeted explosion to take place, avoiding unnecessary damage or harm to civilians and workers at the plant, something that was essential to Tronstad and his team.
Tronstad doesn't want an air raid. He doesn't want anything that will create mass destruction to Norway. He understands that if you send in ground troops or you do mass air raids in Norway, that it's going to take years and probably decades to recover from that.
During their 40-mile journey to Vemurk, the Gunnerside team skis by day and rests by night. They finally reach the gorge near the waterfall located just south of the Vemurk heavy water plant.
That would be an intimidating thing to see. When you get to the plant, you see the waterfall, you finally are back there. It would have been an overwhelming moment, I imagine.
And in front of the factory is a massive ravine, a huge gorge with a bridge leading over it into the hydroelectric plant. The bridge is guarded, heavy security, which means you either have to scale down this mountain or you have to forge a deep ravine, crossing an icy waterway and climb back up to get in. All the while, it's surrounded by barbed wire, lights, guards, mines. So getting into this hydroelectric plant is not going to be an easy task.
During their occupation of Norway, the Germans stationed hundreds of thousands of troops in the country, 1 soldier for every 8 Norwegians.
The reality of the occupation, once it starts becoming apparent, is already too much for people to bear.
The occupation brings severe economic hardships to Norway. Food and other basic commodities become scarce, and the country faces a real risk of famine. The Gunnerside team waits patiently outside of the Vemurk plant, observing the German guards. They know that crossing the heavily guarded bridge is impossible and have figured out an alternative way of getting inside the plant.
There is one place that they can go in, and they can find their way in, and it leads right to the plant, and that is the railroad line.
Realizing this would be their only way in via the railroad line, Raunberg leads the team down into the frozen gorge.
The valley is very windswept. You can imagine when you walk between buildings and it's really windy, that wind forces through there harder than if you're on the other side of the building. It's the same with this valley. That is a very dangerous place to be.
It's a 600-foot gorge down to the Mana River below. By the way, this is the bleak midwinter. Freezing conditions, ice, snow, and a fjord. Not even pretty in summer, by the way, that you would have to negotiate.
But once the men have successfully climbed down the gorge, the river presents a new challenge.
You have to partially go in the water. So remember how cold it is outside. Think how cold the water is. And then when you get out of this, now you're windswept and you're partially wet.
Although with the real risk of hypothermia, Raunberg pushes his men on. As even after the river, they still have a frozen 600-foot cliff to climb, which leads right to the railroad line.
So it's one thing on top of another on top of another to try to make your way to this plant. This is how important this raid is, that men are willing to go to this length to make sure that Hitler doesn't get his atomic weapon.
Incredibly, Raunberg and his men make it all the way across the gorge and reach the railway line.
Extremely challenging, extremely demanding. And let's not forget that besides all these physical demands, there's also the psychological demand of, I've not come here just for a cross-country ski trip. I actually have to go up and blow up a heavy water plant guarded by Germans.
At around midnight on February 28, 1943, the Gunnerside team is ready to enter the heavy water plant.
So the team decides to split basically half and half. There's a covering squad, provide protection, and then there's the actual team that's going to set the explosives. The team that's going to set the explosives knows from Tronstad where to go.
Thanks to his reconnaissance, they know they can enter the plant via an unguarded utility tunnel. They sneak through the narrow utility tunnel with their explosives and finally gain access to the building.
Until the last minute, they have to make adjustments and they have to tweak their plan and respond to the situation as it is developing. And they are now within sight, and all that remains is to blow up the cylinders.
There's Germans around, you're probably scared, you're making this dash, you know that you have to be quick, and any small change to the plan could throw off the entire thing.
They finally reach the basement, and there's 18 massive containers, and as Tronstad worried, their worst fears are realized. They're full.
The commandos run into one person, one of the Norwegians who's working inside the plant, and they confront him, guns drawn because they're doing their raid, and the Norwegian actually asks what they're doing. They tell them that they're there to blow up the facility and blow up the heavy water cylinders. And the Norwegian asks, "Are you here to kill me and all of us too?" And they say, "No, we're not here to kill you." It was very important to Tronstad and others that innocent Norwegians aren't killed in this raid.
The Germans at the Vermert plant are almost exclusively guards, while the people doing the actual work of creating the heavy water are all Norwegian workers. During Germany's occupation of Norway, many Norwegians are forced to work in factories to help the German war effort. Norwegians are prohibited from flying the Norwegian flag, singing their national anthem, and even reading literature that the Germans deem inappropriate can get you sentenced to death.
The living conditions during the Nazi reign, it was deplorable. Shortages of medicine, shortages of food, people lost their jobs, homes were confiscated, freedoms and rights were curtailed, and on a drop of a dime, anybody could be accused of disloyalty. German soldiers parading through the capital. It was a horrific moment for the people of Norway.
Imagine being in Norway. Imagine being under occupation, the indignity of it, the paucity of any kind of entertainment, of decent food, of proper employment, the compromises that are constantly being made. And this is, I think, something very hard for the Anglophone world to get their head around. In Britain, we don't have the heel of the jackboot arriving in our country.
In the basement of the heavy water plant, Raunberg begins to set up the explosives. Everything has led up to these crucial final moments, and time is of the essence.
The explosives have to work in full for everything to go properly. Every one of the cylinders housing this water needs to be taken out. So they are issued explosives that are kind of like what we would think of as more like a C4 putty. It's kind of a thing that can be placed in different areas and twisted around, molded to a location, and then ignited through having a primer placed into it, which is clipped off, and then you have a few minutes to get out of there.
But halfway through setting up the explosives, it looks like the game is up.
The blast team is busy putting their explosives on the canisters when all of a sudden a window shatters next to them. Now imagine what had to go through their mind. They thought they were caught, but it was one of the teammates. Imagine the chaotic scene in their minds of what was transpiring when they realized that one of their teammates was the one who broke the window. And I'm sure that he didn't hear the end of that for a while.
After a heart-racing moment of thinking they had been caught, Raunberg continues to finish setting up the explosives. Meanwhile, Stromsheim is sent to open the exterior basement door for an easy escape while Kaiser guards the Norwegian workers. Every second spent inside the plant increases their chances of getting caught and the mission being a total failure. Once Raunberg is finished setting up all the explosives, he cuts the fuse down from 2 minutes to 30 seconds. He checks the explosives one last time and lights the fuse.
The shorter the mission, the less likely you are to get caught.
The fuses are lit, and the men exit as quickly as possible out of the plant.
I have no idea how these commandos managed to do this. To set the fuse for 30 seconds when you're in the basement of a massive hydroelectric factory teeming with Nazi guards, there's so much that could have gone wrong. But they managed to get out of the hydroelectric plant.
As they run out of the plant about 20 meters or so, they hear this distant thunk. It's not a loud bang, it's not a big explosion, it's a nice little thump. And they think, well, that's it. That must be the explosions that are going off. They're far enough away so the Germans don't see them at the time. And one German kind of looks around, and they see this guard just looking around, wondering what's going on. He appears to be thinking about what that may have been.
The Gunnerside team makes their escape from the Vermerk facility, and alarms eventually begin to go off. Within an hour, the facility's chief engineer and German guards arrive in the basement to find the damaged heavy water cylinders.
So it's a perfect getaway for something that sounds like it's out of a spy novel, and it works to perfection in that way. The charges are laid, cylinders are broken, the heavy water plant is disturbed for a while, and the men get away.
Raunberg and his team retrace their steps through the gorge and quickly get as far away from the Vermerk facility as they can. They know the Germans will be right behind them looking for whoever had done this.
It's a highly successful operation, especially considering the odds and considering that this was somewhat telegraphed, meaning that because of the earlier failure, the Germans knew that it was a target and yet still weren't able to prevent, these very brave men from carrying out an operation of that nature.
When you think about the whole story, you think about the distances that had to be traversed and then the precision with which the plant was targeted.
The mission's a success. There's a massive amount of heavy water that literally goes down the drain. A top German general, von Falkenhorst, comes to inspect the damage. He ends up saying it's a quote-unquote most splendid coup.
The response of it, oh, it's a splendid coup, it shows that at some level there is respect between combatants in the middle of a war. For as much as you might have respected what they did from a tactical standpoint, you obviously don't want to let them get away with what they did. So you do put on this major manhunt to try to find them, because this is the sort of thing that you can't just let go. You have to respond in kind in some way.
3,000 soldiers are brought in to hunt down this handful of commandos in Norway. And to make the story even more compelling, the commandos managed to elude thousands of German soldiers combing the forests and countryside looking for them.
Although the Germans vastly outnumber the Gunnerside team in both people and resources, Raunberg and his team managed to elude the Germans and make their escape.
Several of the commandos somehow managed in the middle of the winter to ski a few hundred miles to Sweden, and they outdistanced the German soldiers.
You know, they divide into two teams, and one stays in the local vicinity to try to draw the attention of German forces and basically hides in the forest and in the mountains. And then the other team skis to Sweden.
It's a pure victory. It's a wonderful local moral high point. Norwegians fighting back on the inside against their German occupiers. And then, of course, they are on skis, they separate, they spread out. They are 9 little needles in a haystack.
Having successfully sabotaged the Vermerk plant, Raunberg, Kaiser, Stromsheim, and Haukli make their escape to Sweden.
Sweden is next to Norway. It's a fellow Scandinavian country. It's neutral. And from Sweden, the commandos can get out without being detected. Also importantly, even though Sweden's neutral, it's assisting the Allies in various ways, and there's an active resistance movement in Sweden, and they're helping to train the Norwegian resistance and intelligence counter forces. News of the mission reaches the Allies, as well as Leif Tronstad back in London, and of course it's welcome news.
The message Tronstad receives reads, "Operation carried out with 100% success. High concentration plant completely destroyed. Shots not exchanged, since the Germans didn't realize anything. Germans do not appear to know whence the party came or whither they disappeared." Operation Gunnerside is one of the most successful acts of sabotage during World War II, carried out by Norwegian patriots who had no formal military background. The SOE exercises are the only training they completed.
It was a clean victory, and that is the message that is transmitted back to Britain. Scot-free. We blew up the place, we blew up the cylinders. Didn't even blow up the place, they just blew up the cylinders. And we made a getaway, and we've all left with our lives intact.
Operation Gunnerside was a major success for the Allies and a crushing defeat for the Germans' nuclear weapons program. Throughout the German occupation of Norway, the Norwegian resistance proves to be a crucial asset to the Allied forces. What starts as a small sabotage unit will eventually grow into a full-on military force by the end of the war. Some of the other victories for the Norwegian resistance includes the destruction of 2 major German warships, called the Bismarck and the Tirpitz.
The Norwegian resistance comes out of that uniquely kind of Norwegian sense of identity, which means that they were not willing to be just assimilated into the Germanic Reich.
Although Operation Gunnerside was a success, by May 1943, the heavy water production facilities were rebuilt and operating once again. Later that year, in November, 140 American bombers flew over and bombed the plant. Unfortunately, 22 Norwegian civilians were killed, the exact tragedy Tronstad had hoped to avoid. But this bombing raid finally crushes Hitler's aspiration to build an atomic bomb once and for all, as the German dictator has major problems elsewhere, and troops are taken out of Norway.
Norway is no longer the priority that it was early in the war, so they have to shift people out of Norway, which is a response to what is happening elsewhere in the war.
So, you know, nothing's going right for the Germans in that capacity, and a place like Norway becomes increasingly indefensible.
While the Germans retreat from Norway, Leif Tronstad continues with his work in the Norwegian resistance, this time taking part in Operation Sunshine, an operation to protect essential installations and particularly power stations from being destroyed by retreating German forces. Tragically, Tronstad will be killed during this mission.
Tronstadt's end is therefore kind of poetic in a twisted, very ironic and sad fashion, right? Because, he dies the death that I suppose he and other resistance fighters ultimately planned for.
This kind of immortalizes him as one of Norway's great heroes, scientist, a resistance fighter, a chemist, and a fallen hero in the fight against the Nazis.
Him being part of that resistance afterwards and continuing just shows the commitment to the cause and shows how devoted he was to Norway.
This is, again, the price that some people paid for this. I mean, that would have been enough danger for a couple of lifetimes faced by people like Tronstad, but the determination to keep fighting the Nazis and to ensure that they're finally out of Norway.
Gunnerside team leader Joachim Raunberg continues his work in the Norwegian resistance and goes on to lead other sabotage operations against the Germans. It is not until 1945 when he was awarded Norway's highest military decoration, the War Cross with Sword, that he realizes the significance of what he and his Gunnerside teammates had achieved. Operation Gunnerside, the brainchild of Leif Tronstad, was a truly amazing act of sabotage. This unorthodox frontline battle was a pivotal moment during World War II, putting a major dent in Nazi Germany's atomic plans and undoubtedly changing the course of the war.
The course of history would have been completely different in a terrifying sort of way.
Gunnerside is a story that shows the dedication that people during the Second World War had to the cause.
June 6, 1944, D-Day. As the Allies are storming the beaches in the largest amphibious invasion in history, a group of light infantrymen are in the midst of a dangerous operation behind enemy lines that will be critical to the success of D-Day. The mission? To capture and defend 2 bridges near the Orne River in northern France, a crucial point in both the Allies and the Nazis' battle plans. Although small in stature, these bridges will prove immensely important in the battle for Northern Europe.
D-Day is the beginning of the end for the Nazis and pretty much hinges on these 2 small bridges.
It's got all the elements of a really cool secret operation, because it is.
This was a feat of daring do. It was a specific enemy target, and one, crucially, that had to remain intact.
But how did they get there, and how long can they hold out? June 5, 1944, just before midnight, only hours before the planned start of D-Day, 6 Horsa gliders towed by Halifax bombers take off from RAF Tarrant Rushden in Dorset, England. They are embarking on a mission that could decide the fate of D-Day.
The weather's bad, it's overcast, it's drizzling, it's windy. They got to be able to get behind enemy lines safely and in a stealthy manner.
Their mission is to capture 2 strategically located bridges, vital to ensuring an Allied victory.
If this early mission is detected, it could undermine the secrecy and element of surprise for all of D-Day.
The Allies aim to change the course of World War II, beginning with the liberation of France. With the invasion of Poland in 1939 marking the start of the war, the Germans are on the offensive. Hitler has his eye on France. This strategic location will provide a tactical base for air and sea attacks against Britain. In March of 1940, the Germans begin their campaign against France. The French army has been weakened by World War I, and France is officially under German control just 2 months later. Amidst German occupation, an elaborate resistance network is created by French patriots.
They're the unsung heroes of World War II. Men and women, regular people now fighting against Nazi occupation, belonging to organized resistance groups like the Maquis or Alliance.
These operatives are essential to inform the Allies of German activity in the area.
Aerial reconnaissance, at least at that time, could only go so far because we're talking about observing things from thousands of feet away. From very high up, there were certain details which would be available only to people on the ground.
By 1943, the tides of war are changing for the Germans.
This is not Germany of 1939. This is a nation ravaged by war. Allied bombing has taken a significant toll, and their resources are seriously depleted.
After a string of victories throughout 1943, the Allies regained territories occupied by the Nazis.
The more successes you have, the more you believe that you can continue to be successful. And so you tend to go to bolder and bolder actions.
The Allies formulate a plan to liberate France and bring an end to the war. Operation Overlord. 339 Allied divisions commit to this battle. Over 1 million troops in total.
Resources are coming from virtually everyone who opposes the Nazis. So you have Free French soldiers, you have Canadians, the Americans, the British, and you have assorted persons from a variety of occupied countries.
On June 6th, 156,000 of these men will attempt to land on the beaches of Normandy and what would become known as D-Day.
We're talking about the greatest amphibious operation in history, and there's no guarantee it's going to work.
The resource allocation for D-Day is like nothing else. There is no precedent for it, certainly not on that scale. It takes years in preparation.
156,000 men, 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft. This is going to change the course of the Second World War.
Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower draws up plans to invade 5 beaches on the coast of Normandy, paving the way for an inland advance on the eastern flank.
You are landing a force the like of which the world has never seen before. If you can't get them out from the beaches upon which they've landed, you've got a problem. You need to ensure you have your routes into mainland France. So you need to secure bridges out.
8 kilometers in from the Normandy coast, a bridge over the Caen Canal will allow the invasion force to quickly move east after landing. Another bridge just 470 meters east over the Orne River will provide a continued path inland from the beaches.
We have to hold the bridge so that the thousands and thousands of men and trucks and supplies can move their way toward Paris and ultimately Berlin. Secondly, we have to hold the bridges as a choke point so that the Nazis can't reinforce their overrun troops at Normandy.
Major General Richard Gale of the 6th Airborne Division is tasked with formulating a plan to complete this critical task. Gale selects Major John Howard to lead the operation on the ground.
Major John Howard is the pin-up of the so-called People's War. He is the guy who's climbed up through the ranks through dint of personal endeavor and military acumen. And he's a team player. He looks out for his boys. He's the man you want at the helm.
The initial plan was to capture the bridges using paratroopers, an idea that quickly falls by the wayside in favor of gliders.
Transport plane can come in and drop down hundreds, thousands of men, but they're like dandelion seeds in the wind. Where are they going to end up? A glider, on the other hand, you're all landing in the same aircraft in the same place. You get out together, you're still one unit. Not a minute is lost.
The glider is quiet, it has no engines, and it will be dropped off by a tug, that is a bomber pulling it, a fair distance away from where it's actually going to get to. But of course, a bomber makes noise, and the Allies had a cunning plan. The bombers continue on a slightly separate course and then drop bombs as if they're on a bombing run. And this, of course, was completely credible because that part of the coast was being bombed day after day after day in preparation for D-Day.
It's a really smart decision by the British and starts this chain of events that certainly plays out very famously on the beaches on the morning of June the 6th. But a lot was going on the ground overnight further inland. And it really does start with those 181 guys taking off from Dorset.
The force is comprised mostly of D Company of the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, the Ox and Bucks. They're reinforced by 2 platoons from B Company, plus 20 Royal Engineers and 12 glider pilots. The gliders will land southeast of Sword Beach, where the British landing force is due to arrive hours later. Once the bridges are seized and ready to be reinforced, Major Howard will tip off intelligence officers with the code words ham and jam. As they approach their targets, Major Howard in the lead glider recognizes the area from reconnaissance photographs and knows exactly what the German defenses are down below. At this stage of the war, the Allies control the skies and take every opportunity to take aerial photographs of potential invasion sites.
17 million photographs. Every gun emplacement, every bridge, every infantryman, every pole to prevent the landing of a parachute, each and every one was noted.
And of course, we're also getting information from agents on the ground, from resistance leaders, all putting together this picture.
Certain number of ways in which you can attack a bridge. The Germans set up all the defenses in order to prevent that.
They've got relatively formidable defensive positions. They've got machine gun nests on both bridges. On one bridge, they've got an anti-tank gun.
Barbed wire and a trench system are set up around the bridges, manned by 50 riflemen and machine gunners. The 736th Grenadier Regiment of the 716th Infantry. This unit is largely made up of poorly equipped men from German-occupied nations, with some older Germans mixed in. The German soldiers have instructions to destroy the bridges if necessary, to stop them from ending up in Allied hands. At 7 minutes after midnight on June 6th, the bombers, towing the British gliders, cast off their lines in preparation for landing.
3 gliders are going to land next to one bridge and 3 next to another bridge, 400 meters away. So it's a relatively tiny strip of land that they've got to land in, and they've got to land one after the other in synchronized order.
Major Howard instructs the glider pilots to land with the nose right against the barbed wire, surrounding their assigned bridges.
You don't have as much control of the aircraft as you would with an engine. So it's a great challenge, particularly to do it at night.
In order to pinpoint this exact location in the dark, the glider pilots must execute the dangerous and risky task of performing a dive approach and pulling up at the very last moment, slamming the glider into the ground as smoothly as possible and hoping for the best. But as the glider landings begin, things don't go to plan.
And the very first glider with Major John Howard comes in and sort of crash lands. The good news is it crash landed right next to the bridge.
They were going too fast when they came in, and then the final violent stop, so violent in fact that the 2 pilots are thrown out of their seats and up against the windshield, and yet despite this, they land at exactly the right place. It couldn't have been more perfect. If you'd written that sequence of events in a novel, people wouldn't have believed it.
With the bumpy glider landing, Major Howard's seatbelt is broken and he bashes his head on the ceiling, rendering him unconscious for a few minutes and with a possible concussion.
When you're concussed, you're dizzy, headaches, sensory information, lights and sounds can cause pain that would make it very difficult for him to concentrate and very difficult to be efficient in his decision-making.
Despite his injury, Howard leads his platoon out of the glider. 2 other gliders filled with infantrymen and engineers land nearby for the attack, all within 42 meters of the Caen Canal Bridge. If the Germans attack the gliders now, the loss of life could be catastrophic to the success of the mission. But luck is on their side. The German sentries, only meters away, disregard the sounds of the landing gliders, assuming they're hearing falling debris from a crashing bomber. East of the canal, the 3 gliders approaching the Orne River Bridge are not so lucky. 2 of the 3 gliders land successfully, but the 3rd glider takes a wrong turn.
This is the glider that contains Howard's second-in-command, Captain Priday, and this goes completely off beam.
Although he's missed his target, fate will hand Captain Priday a different role on D-Day. Meanwhile, at the Caen Canal, Major Howard's D Company troops rush towards the canal bridge. Leading the charge is Lieutenant Den Brotheridge, commanding the 1st platoon across.
He wants to be first across that bridge. He knows it's going to be dangerous, but he's going to be the man doing it.
There are 2 German sentries. One of them manages to fire a flare, and then he's shot and killed. The other one runs.
As they continue across the bridge, Brotheridge and his platoon are attacked by machine gun fire coming from the far side of the canal.
And one of those bullets sadly goes through Brotheridge's throat, and he's mortally wounded.
Lieutenant Brotheridge becomes the first battle casualty of D-Day, but his men are so dedicated to seizing the bridge that they don't even notice he's fallen until minutes later. Brotheridge's platoon continues across the bridge to take up a defensive position on the west bank as the Royal Engineers search for explosive charges on the bridge and cut their fuses.
It's pretty much standard operating procedure that if you're assigned a key bridge like that, if you cannot hold it, you blow it up.
The engineers would have to come in and secure those explosives so that the Germans could not do that. It would have been extremely dangerous when you're working with explosives that any wrong move could potentially be set off, or the Germans could just go ahead and actually blow up the bridge if they were so inclined.
On the east bank, Howard's other two platoons clear bunkers and trenches with grenades and gunfire. The German defenders are overmatched. By 21 minutes after midnight, German resistance on the Caen Canal Bridge is over, and Major Howard's D Company, the Ox and Bucks, have full control of this critical throughway. Howard soon gets word that the nearby Orne River Bridge is also fully captured by his men.
Fortunately, the defenders to that bridge don't put up even as much of a fight as they do on the Caen Canal Bridge, and they flee before there's even a shot fired.
But a lone German soldier manages to survive the bridge attack and retreats to headquarters to inform his commander. Major Howard knows he's in for a tough night, defending these bridges. The Allied invasion of France is just hours away, and the Germans haven't got a clue about what's coming.
It was a nasty night. They assumed that nobody was going to land, and boy, did they assume wrong.
The Germans predict an Allied assault on France as early as 1942, but they are unable to predict exactly where and when it might be, so they bolster the defenses across the Western Front.
For the last 2 years, one of the great obsessions of Hitler had been reinforcing this Atlantic Wall, this extraordinary concrete fortification that ran from Norway right down to the Franco-Spanish southern coast.
That is a massive defensive structure. Thousands and thousands of landmines, thousands of machine gun nests, thousands of artillery.
In early 1944, Hitler assigned one of his best men, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, to improve the wall's defenses in preparation for an Allied attack. The highly decorated Rommel had earned the nickname the Desert Fox for his exploits as commander of the German forces in North Africa. The Germans suspect the attack will come at Pas de Calais, 350 kilometers east of the actual D-Day landing sites.
Ideally, you want the shortest crossing, and that was this crossing from Dover to Pas de Calais. So it was identified as being the location where the Allies would hit back at German occupation in France. And of course, we played to that presumption.
The section of the Atlantic Wall at Pas de Calais is strengthened with an enormous amount of concrete and steel, and the Nazis install 3 major gun batteries, pointing their 406mm cannons at Dover, England.
There were things called hedgehogs, wedged down into the ground with a sharpened spike at the top. The boats would have been hung up on the hedgehogs, which would have caused a massive water traffic jam and prevented the Allies from landing.
In the months leading up to D-Day, the Allies launch a massive disinformation campaign aimed at keeping the Nazis' attention on Pas de Calais. But the actual attack will happen in Normandy, and the first Allied troops are already on the ground. 30 minutes after the gliders first left for the coast of Normandy, the capture of the bridges is complete. Major Howard sends the magic words back to British intelligence operations, ham and jam. This signifies that reinforcements can begin to move in to bolster the troops. But one of the 6 gliders is still missing. Major Howard's second in command, Captain Proudet, realizes that they have landed in the wrong place. The nearby bridge is not the one he's meant to capture.
First of all, they're let off in the wrong place by the tug, and then the pilot of the glider mistakenly identifies the Dives River as the location where he should be. Now, this group have now got a problem.
He's going to be feeling the level of anxiety. So he's operating in a vacuum. where he doesn't know what's happening, and he bears responsibility as second in command for making it successful.
He has to make good. He's luckily used to having a bit of military authority. He's clearly got his wits about him, and he buckles down and secures a bridgehead on the Dives River.
Although this isn't Pradet's original objective, he decides to capture the bridge anyway. The Germans put up a fight, but they're no match for Captain Pradet and his men, and the bridge is taken.
This was a job that's actually been assigned to the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. And once they've secured that bridge, they then begin to move back towards their actual location, which is Ranville and then those 2 bridges.
Around the time that Howard and Pradet are securing their bridges, other Allied missions are beginning, paving the way for the D-Day landings later that morning. A 1,200 airplane assault heads to the coast of France to target the Atlantic Wall.
Where you send in the bombers in advance of the land invasion to compromise as best you can the German defenses. The more damage that you can inflict from the air, the more likelihood for success you have on that beach invasion.
The bad news is this terrible weather. There's a lot of cloud cover, which makes bombing really tricky at best. And of course, you still have anti-aircraft defenses, which the Germans are manning, which makes your life a little bit of a nightmare.
Meanwhile, at the Caen Canal and Orne River bridges, Major Howard and his men are braced for a German counterattack.
They need to hold them long enough for the 7th Paratroop Battalion to get there in time to reinforce them.
At around 50 minutes past midnight, the 600 paratroopers, led by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Pine Coffin, start to land in their designated drop zones east of the bridges.
They're expecting 7th Para to arrive within the hour, but of course, as is the way with parachute troops who tend to be dropped over a dispersed area and it takes them a long time to finally all meet up and then get on the march, that 1 hour is going to string into more like 2. So you've got this crucial period that can this small group of force hang on until the Paras come to their rescue?
While Howard is waiting for the 7th to show up, he gets a welcome visitor who had parachuted into northern France an hour earlier. Brigadier Nigel Poet is on a mission to set up a base in the small French village of Ranville. He was accompanied in his jump by a Pathfinder unit, a small advance force of paratroopers tasked with setting up the drop zones for the 7th. As Poet confers with Howard, they can hear the sounds of German vehicles in the nearby villages of Benouville and Le Port. If reinforcements don't arrive soon, they will lose their hold on the bridge.
What they're concerned with is what's going to happen if the 21st Panzer Division comes into play.
The Germans build some impressive tanks. The Panzer, the Tiger, the Leopard. These tanks are larger and much more powerful than what the Allies have. There were multiple battles where it would take 2, 3, 4, 5 Sherman tanks to neutralize one of these massive German tanks.
The commander of the German 716th Infantry is informed at 1:20 that the British are in control of the Orne River and the Caen Canal bridges, which are fully intact. To stop the Allies from encroaching, the commander attempts to order the 21st Panzer Division to defend the bridge landing areas.
Now, if you could have counterattacked, they could have probably reclaimed them, but they couldn't because of this very complex command chain going right back to Berlin.
One person has insisted no Panzer divisions will be moved without his order, and that, of course, is the dictator Adolf Hitler. He's asleep, and no one has the courage to wake him up.
We know that this person had bouts of anger and would lash out sometimes at the bringers of bad news. So, understandably, his staff was a bit concerned about waking him up.
Hitler's unwillingness to allow other people to make decisions speaks to a couple things. One, his just total ego, that he would not allow anybody else to do that. His also distrust of a lot of the people who were around him. Therefore, he had to be the one who made all the decisions. And ultimately, that was to the detriment of the German forces, because that is not a sustainable model for military decision-making.
Although the Germans are aware that the Allies may attack northern France anytime, they have no idea that June 6 is D-Day. And as the weather has taken a turn for the worst in early June, they're led into a false sense of security. They were so unconcerned that Nazi commander Erwin Rommel, in charge of the forces in Normandy, is not even in France at the time.
He hops it back to Germany to give his wife a pair of shoes for her 50th birthday because he thinks that the weather simply isn't going to invite this unprecedented amphibious attack, and he gets it very wrong.
The German forces are left in the hands of lower-ranked officials.
If Rommel had been there, he may have ignored the fact that Hitler wasn't able to give an order or no one was prepared to wake him up. But he wasn't there, and his more junior commanders were not prepared to take that risk.
Although the German commanders are not permitted to order the panzers to move, they are able to move the support units assigned to them, and so begins the German counteroffensive to recapture the bridges. The 125th Panzer Grenadiers is ordered to assemble just to the east of the Orne River, to wait for further instructions. The 192nd Panzer Grenadiers is ordered to move in from the west, recapture the bridges, and attack the parachute landing zones. These troops don't have any heavy armor or tanks, so they are reinforced here by two other units, the 1st Panzerjäger Company and parts of the 989th Heavy Artillery Battalion from the north.
And they do have some armor, actually, and they eventually put together a small column of tanks.
The Germans head towards the bridges, but having had a few hours to dig in, Howard's men are ready for an attack, and they got a good bit of luck. One of the weapons at Howard's disposal is the Piat, a handheld anti-tank gun. As the first tank comes into view, one of the troops from D Company fires.
And incredibly, this charge explodes inside the tank and it blows up the ammunition. So there's an enormous explosion. And this so terrifies the Germans that not only does the rest of that column back up, they're now convinced that there's a much stronger force at the bridge with really effective 6-pounder anti-tank guns, which they don't have. And this gives the airborne troops crucial breathing space.
The 192nd heads back to headquarters in Bénouville to regroup. The German commander needs to assess the situation before attacking again. But the 192nd will return to the bridges. Having fought back the first attack, Howard and his men are relieved to see the first group of paratroopers from the 7th Battalion finally arriving at the bridge.
That's the moment where the squaddies, the ordinary soldiers on the bridge, can breathe the first sigh of relief, because most of the defensive heavy lifting from this point is going to be carried out by the 7th Parachute Battalion.
Sometime later, the regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pine Coffin, arrives with more men, for a total of 200 men in 3 companies, fewer than 50% of the men expected.
Ultimately, a lot of those missing guys do trudge in later on, but it's all about getting the maximum amount of force into the right place at the right time, so that they can take up positions and defend it against a counterattack.
The 7th A and C companies are positioned just outside of Bénouville, facing south towards the city of Caen, and B Company in La Poure facing Ouistreham to the north near Sword Beach, where the British troops will soon be landing. Howard's D Company is pulled back as reserved to hold the area between the two bridges. The 7th will bear the brunt of German counterattacks on the west side of the Caen Canal throughout the whole day.
You've got 200 paratroopers, so they don't have any big guns. All they've got are handheld anti-tank weapons and gammon grenades to stop an armored attack. But you've got a potential force of thousands bearing down on you.
While the men at the bridge are busy holding off the Germans, 8 kilometers away at Sword Beach, the British begin their aerial and naval assault, targeting the German artillery and coastal defenses in preparation for the beach landings.
The landing on Sword Beach, as far as the Pegasus operation is concerned, is absolutely crucial, because this is where the relief is going to come. They don't know quite how long it's going to take for them to get through those defenses. So although they estimate they might be able to relieve the bridges by midday, possibly a few hours later, they don't know for sure.
The first beach landings in Normandy are only a few hours away. To ensure that the Germans have no idea where the actual planned invasion will occur, the Allies create one of the biggest deceptions ever carried out in military history.
I think one of the keys to the success of D-Day is actually this incredibly sophisticated and ultimately very successful subterfuge operation known as Operation Fortitude.
Operation Fortitude is a component of a massive disinformation campaign called Operation Bodyguard.
In order to secure the truth that the Allies are planning this massive assault for Normandy, they have to go through an elaborate series of lies to convince the Germans that the attack is coming at Calais. And it requires significant moving parts, a lot of details, double agents working for the British who have cover stories, and then all of those military assets.
To create the illusion of troops building up near southeast England, a phantom fighting force is created, led by American General George Patton.
We had intercepted a German communication saying Patton is the most gifted general, the one they're most afraid of. So they knew Patton was going to be the tip of the spear, the point that led the invasion. And Patton's fake army, it was inflatable tanks, balloons, wooden structures. It was like a Hollywood movie set.
In the months leading up to D-Day, decoy fleets of landing craft, simply painted canvases covering steel frames, are placed around the River Thames and other important waterways. Inflatable Sherman tanks are deployed and moved to different locations at night. Rollers are used to simulate tire tracks to keep up the pretense. To further ramp up the disinformation campaign, the Allies increase aerial attacks on Pas-de-Calais. They also hire an Australian actor, Lieutenant M.E. Clifton James, to pose as General Bernard Montgomery, the commander of all Allied ground forces. Dressed in one of Montgomery's uniforms, Lieutenant James, who bears a striking resemblance to the general, flies to Gibraltar and then Algiers, where he's sure to be spotted by German intelligence. It's hoped that the Germans will think Montgomery is in Africa. They won't be expecting the Allies to attack mainland Europe without him.
And we knew from our extraordinary levels of intelligence that, in fact, the Germans had fallen for our plan hook, line, and sinker. And those cannon, the panzer reinforcements, the big guns literally on Germany's Western Front were pointing in the wrong direction, in the wrong place.
There were multiple divisions redeployed to Calais. If they had been deployed at Normandy, that could have changed the whole nature of the D-Day landing.
But ultimately, the success of D-Day could be significantly set back if the bridges come back under enemy control. This is now a strong possibility, as just after 300 hours, the Germans launch another attack. The newly arrived 7th paratroopers are facing an onslaught from a well-armed battalion of the 192nd Panzer Grenadier Regiment. As the battle rages, the 7th holds their own. But it's only a matter of time before the Germans receive permission to mobilize their panzers, and there's no way the 7th can defeat them.
Every time they rebuff a German incursion, it depends on the toll it takes on them. As long as the toll is light, then you're going to continue to feel a series of successes, and it's going to strengthen your resolve and make you feel like this is doable. On the other hand, they're also in a hyper-alert state that is going to wear on them. This leads to what's called operational fatigue. The longer you're on, the more likely you are to make mistakes.
As the battle for the bridges continues, French families in the dwellings dotted around the canal and river take cover in their houses. One such home on the west bank of the canal is Café Gondry, which is about to earn its place in history.
It's a cafe which has served as a bit of a refuge for the German sentries who go in there to take break from their sentry duty.
As soon as the fighting started, the cafe's owners, Georges and Thérèse Gondry, took shelter in the cellar with their 2 young children.
Monsieur and Madame Gondry are actually sympathizers. They are in touch with the resistance, and they've been handing over a certain amount of information.
The information that would be gathered in these types of cafes would be through the conversations that were taking place between the German soldiers. They were excellent sources of intelligence, and this intelligence would then be carried to the French resistance, who could utilize it themselves or transmit it across the channel to the Allies.
Not knowing who's prevailing outside, they're apprehensive when they hear a knock at their door. They're relieved to see 3 British soldiers. The Gondrys are eager to help the British liberators in any way they can, and the cafe is converted into an aid station as casualties are brought inside, away from enemy fire. Café Gondry becomes the first house in France to be liberated by the Allies as the beach landings begin. At 6:26, the Americans land on Omaha and Utah beaches. Their main objectives are to secure an 8-kilometer beachhead between Port-au-Bassin and the Vire River, and to take the Cotentin Peninsula to the west. The force at Omaha is expected to battle a single German regiment, but instead, they're up against the entire 352nd Division and suffer the most casualties of all the beach landings.
The way the German defenses were organized, one regiment would be in charge of this part of the Normandy coast, another regiment in this part, and so forth. Right where the Allies came ashore at Omaha, it constituted the division between 2 different regiments. So instead of fighting 1, they ended up fighting 2. but they somehow managed to come ashore and take the beach.
Having failed to recapture the bridges, the Germans try a new tactic.
The main hazard they had through the morning was from sniper fire.
But D Company fights back, ironically using a German weapon against them.
They bring the anti-tank gun into action and actually manage to knock out a water tower that they're convinced the sniper is hiding in.
D Company does their best to take cover from the snipers and maintain their positions, but they do suffer casualties, and the wounded are taken to Café Gondré. Thérèse Gondré is a trained nurse and works with the troop doctor to treat the wounded.
And you see this actually throughout France during the liberation. There's an excitement to help in whatever way they can, and certainly this is a great example of that, where she's there, she wants to assist, use her skills as a nurse.
But Café Gondré isn't the only thing to be liberated. Outside, Georges Gondré is digging up his yard, unearthing 90 bottles of champagne buried since the German occupation began in 1940.
We know from accounts of German occupation that they had a tendency to appropriate, basically steal, luxury goods. They certainly did not want the average French person to enjoy such luxuries.
If you're a French nationalist, what has happened from the time the Germans came in, that's not France. That's not French culture, that's not French life. And once the Germans are out, bring up the champagne, and it's sort of a symbolic acknowledgement that this is France again.
But for Major Howard, there's no time for celebration. He's worried about his second in command, Captain Pridet, and the other men who he now must report as missing in action.
The position of Pridet and the missing platoon is very hazardous because they're behind enemy lines, basically. You never know where the Germans are going to pop up.
After securing the bridge across the Dives River, some 10 kilometers east of their intended destination, Captain Pridet and his men continue moving, constantly checking their surroundings for the enemy, as they head towards Allied headquarters in Ranville. As they push forward, they face enemy fire from the woods. To keep his men safe from the Germans, Captain Pridet leads them off the road.
It's waterlogged, they're coming through dikes and ditches, so it takes Pridet an awful long time to slowly but surely work his way to the bridges.
An hour after the Americans land on Omaha and Utah beaches, the British and Canadian forces are faced with choppy seas. At Gold Beach, the British 50th Infantry Division decides that instead of using tank landing crafts 500 meters out, they will run their tanks to the beach directly. The British secure a beachhead and take out the big guns in the area with relatively light casualties. But the Canadians, due to land at Juno Beach, will be delayed until 7:45. In the meantime, the British and Free French forces are starting to land at Sword Beach. The British 3rd Infantry Division is tasked with the assault. Fortunately, German fortifications at Sword Beach are lighter than the other landing sites.
The Allies were expecting barbed wire and an array of anti-tank defenses, which is consistent with the Atlantic Wall. Well, it turns out the Germans don't do very much here, but their fortifications need to be cleared and secured.
2 squadrons of Royal Engineers work to clear the beach, allowing the troops to penetrate the coastline. Facing moderate fire from German machine gun nests, the troops advance to capture the beachfront villas and resorts with little difficulty.
Fortunately, Sword Beach is the beach where some of the fewest casualties are taken by the Allied landing forces.
Success at Sword Beach is critical to Major Howard and his team, who are waiting for these troops to relieve them. The men at the bridgehead are able to hear the landing action from their positions, just 8 kilometers away from Sword Beach.
Can you imagine? It's a sort of festival of noise. And you're sitting there, bedded in a gun pit under a bridge, knowing that you're outnumbered by the enemy, hearing your own guys at sea in the air overhead, doing what they need to do to try and make sure your gains are going to be held onto.
Amidst the activity, 2 Spitfires fly over the bridges.
And they amazingly drop the morning's newspapers, which of course announced D-Day. It's extraordinary to think, isn't it? As they're making history, the news of that history is actually dropping down on their location.
With the quick victory at Sword Beach, the British troops begin their advance towards the Orne River and Caen Canal bridges. While the British are taking Sword, the delayed Canadians finally landed Juno. During the first hour of fighting, the Canadians face heavy resistance from the German 716th Division. Suffering a 50% casualty rate, comparable to their American counterparts on Omaha Beach.
That stands out to me when I think about that day. Whose story ended on that beach for no other reason than they just happened to be at that place at that time, and the person who was maybe a foot or two to the right or the left, their story continued.
Once the beach is secured, the Canadian forces will move inland to capture the nearby seaside towns before pushing south into Normandy. At the time of the D-Day beach landings, Hitler is still asleep. None of his generals dare to reposition the Führer's troops without his permission. Vital hours are lost as the German Supreme Commander slumbers. The exhausted 6th Airborne Division has been holding the bridges for hours amidst enemy fire. At 900 hours, Brigadier Poet returns from Allied HQ in Ranville, along with Major General Gale, who had arrived in Normandy by glider just after 3 a.m. They brought with them the news that reinforcements are on their way, though it would be a few hours yet. Although cheered by the news, the troops defending the bridges suddenly have an unexpected and dangerous visitor. Plowing up the river from the Normandy coast, they spot 2 powerful German gunboats. All the victories and sacrifices that had been achieved could be wiped out in a matter of moments.
They don't have long-range weapons. They have hand grenades, and they have Sten machine guns, which have an effective range of only about 100 meters. So they can't hit the boat until it's close.
The lead boat gets dangerously close, but a weapon that had been successfully employed earlier is again put to good use.
And they open up on it, not with the anti-tank gun, which they can't swivel round to get into position to fire up the canal, but with a pier, this handheld anti-tank weapon. And it's a brilliant shot, goes straight through the wheelhouse, explodes, knocks the boat out, the boat kind of slews round onto the coast, and they capture the occupants of the boat.
As the Germans are marched off to captivity, the second boat turns around and heads back to the coast. The bridges and beaches remain in Allied control. But German opposition is ramping up.
If you're the Allies, you're thinking that you're in a very good spot. The Germans do have people in the area who weren't on the beach, who can certainly attack the beach or retreat and head inland and go to the bridges.
Just to the east, there are over 2,000 German troops waiting for permission from Hitler to attack. Other German threats are less than a day's march away. The 12th SS Panzer Division in the Lisieux and the Panzer-Lehr Division in Chartres. At 1000 hours, the D Company men on the Canal Bridge face another challenge.
After holding the bridges all night long, turning away tanks, turning away infantry, dealing with snipers, in the sky, a lone German bomber appears. They have no weapons that can deal with this. And the bomber flies directly overhead and releases a bomb, and that bomb sails directly down and strikes the bridge.
This is a rare bombing on a day in which the Luftwaffe was mostly absent.
The head of the Air Force, Hermann Göring, grotesquely mismanaged the Luftwaffe in all aspects, and he fell out of favor with Hitler as a result.
The whole Luftwaffe, which was the pride and joy of the German armed forces at the beginning of the war, has been really eroded and depleted. The Germans just don't have the capacity to churn out airplanes like they did in the early stages of the war, and they also don't have the pilots.
With 1,000 ships at anchor off the coast and thousands of men on a beach, had the Luftwaffe come in with bombs and strafing with machine guns, D-Day would have been a bloodbath.
But bombs are still dropped. D Company and reinforcements at the bridge do their best to take cover from the incoming bombs.
Can you imagine their hearts must have been in their throats, all that work for nothing, and then that is gone, piff, paff, poof.
But with incredible good fortune, it hits, doesn't detonate, and bounces off into the water.
So now you've got a number of very lucky events. So it's going to be a big morale boost, but you still have a job to do. But now you start thinking that you're lucky, that you're going to succeed no matter what, that you can beat the odds.
Even while the Allies are attacking in Normandy, they continue their mission to convince the Germans that an even bigger assault is imminent at Pas-de-Calais to the east. To reinforce this subterfuge, Allied aircraft drops hundreds of dummy paratroops in the area.
We had what were called Ruperts. like a crash test dummy. They would fly over a part of Europe in a bomber, put parachutes on these Ruppers and throw them out the window.
And when they hit the ground, they would trigger off gunfire and crackers. They even landed special operations troops to play phonograph records to make it seem like you could hear their voices, incredibly sophisticated. And this, of course, happened well away from the Normandy landings.
The Germans had spotters, literally from Norway down to Spain. And they would see this and radio back, it's here. I imagine the Germans charging out into the field and holding up these little dummies with parachutes on and being duped time and time again by it.
Around 10 a.m., Hitler finally emerges from his slumber, greeted with the news of the Allies' amphibious assault. He's excited by this news, believing Germany can achieve an easy victory.
I think this is the success of Operation Fortitude. He's still not entirely convinced this is the main landing. So although he does give the go-ahead for some counterattacks, he doesn't order all the other panzer divisions located further north in the Pas-de-Calais to move towards the Normandy beachhead. And this, of course, is another mistake.
But unfortunately for Major Howard and his troops, around midday, the Germans mobilized 17 tanks towards the town of Bénouville.
Imagine being out on the road to try to meet them and seeing these multiple-ton gigantic tanks with very thick armor and guns the size of a telephone pole headed toward you.
After hours of staving off attacks to hold their positions, the British 6th Airborne Division is exhausted and depleted.
Physically and emotionally, mentally, they would have been absolutely spent. And then you have 17 German tanks roll in. Must have been a very intimidating sight.
But although exhausted, the troops resolved to keep the Germans from retaking the bridges hold strong. As the tanks bear down on them, they manage, against all odds, to destroy the lead tank using an improvised grenade called a Gammon bomb.
A gammon bomb kind of looks like an oversized gourd. It's like a bottle, basically. And it is a hand grenade at the end of the day. The difference is that it can be adapted to have an explosion that's small, medium, or large, basically speaking. For things like tanks, of course, you're going to pack it full of explosives and it can do sizable damage, and it does the trick.
The other tank gets stuck in a traffic jam behind the destroyed tank, giving the men the opportunity they need to attack the rest.
They somehow managed to neutralize 13 of the 17 tanks. So yet again, they managed to hold the bridges. It's a 1 in a million situation, but they did it.
And it's at this point that Howard is asked by the commander of the 7th Parachute Battalion if he will send some of his men back across the bridge to help bolster the defense on the west side of the Caen Canal Bridge.
While Howard's men are covering the bridges, the 7th push forward to the town of Bénouville and engage in house-to-house fighting to clear the lurking Germans occupying houses.
There were frontline soldiers who were billeted in French homes. That's what occupying forces do. The Germans used those towns as defensive networks and also to rig them, to line them up with explosives so that you hinder the enemy's advance. So these towns become really critical.
Just after midday, the German 21st Panzer Division finally receives permission to attack the Allied forces advancing from the Normandy beach landings.
The Germans are slow off the mark. If they'd been allowed off the leash sooner, they would have had a chance to drive all the way into Sword Beach and possibly beyond.
The 125th Panzer Grenadiers are ordered toward the Orne River and Caen Canal bridges, but they are easily spotted by British troops. To keep morale high at the bridges, Georges Gondry has a plan.
In a very French style, the cafe owner brings out the secret store of champagne to celebrate the Allied invasion.
Gondry hands out the champagne to the British troops. This gesture is well received, and many of Major Howard's men find excuses to get their free drink at various points during D-Day, amidst constant enemy fire.
Probably quite warm, you'd imagine. Been sitting in the dune soil. But anyway, any tipple, I guess, is welcome once you've been through a night like the 5th, 6th of June.
Major Howard and his men have been holding on for over 12 hours, but Captain Purday is still missing. Purday and his men continue onwards to Ranville, the location of Allied headquarters. On their route, they encounter elements of the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion and are invited to join their attack on the German-held town of Bavant. But Purday declines in favor of bringing his men to the bridges as strong as possible and completing his mission, although somewhat late. After swift success on Sword Beach, the British push further into France, dealing with pockets of German resistance as they meet them. The troops are now free to head towards the Caen Canal and Orne River bridges and the anxiously waiting soldiers. Their arrival at 13:30 is announced by the sound of bagpipes, played by piper Bill Millen of the 1st Special Service Brigade, who had played his pipes constantly since arriving at Sword Beach.
I'm sure it was a very sweet sound for all those who were at the bridge to hear that and to have that signal that reinforcements were coming, but it also is a sign that what was happening at the beach had gone according to plan.
It's a bit of a taunt, saying we can do this because we're in control. We're going to keep these bridges. We're going to take back France. This is just the start of a whole series of dominoes, and everybody's going to be in a huge positive morale and a lot of happiness.
But the Germans still haven't given up. At 1500 hours, yet another gunboat approaches, this time from Caen in the south.
And they attack this with the anti-tank gun, because that can swivel into a position that it can engage the boat coming up.
They miss their first shot, but the second round hits from over 200 meters away.
It knocks out this boat, forces it to turn around, but it just goes to show how vital the capture and therefore the counter-destruction of the bridges was for the Germans. They realized they needed to knock out those bridges.
Through the late afternoon and early evening, German attacks on the bridgehead taper off. Just after 2100 hours, as hundreds of British airplanes and gliders are flying overhead, dropping men and supplies, the 2nd Battalion Royal Warwickshire Regiment of the 150th Infantry Brigade marches in from Sword Beach. Howard hands over the bridges, intact and secure.
They're finally relieved completely, and this is the moment where they can relinquish all responsibility for those 2 bridges and go into reserve in the town of Ronville.
And after briefing the new commander, Major Howard and his exhausted men are finally able to depart for battalion headquarters, a full day after taking off from England. When they reach Ranville, Major Howard is pleasantly surprised to see his second in command, Captain Pridet, who has just arrived after a waterlogged and woodsy trek from Varaville.
D-Day is an overwhelming success. There are objectives which aren't achieved on the initial day, that's for sure. And there are mistakes that are made. But it is the beginning of the end for the Nazis in Western Europe.
Over 150,000 troops arrive on D-Day, and by June 17th, over 500,000 soldiers are on the ground to push the Germans out of France and move inland to liberate Europe. A month after D-Day, the 2 bridges are renamed to honor the British, who held them strong throughout the long battle.
The bridge at the Orne is renamed for the gliders, and the bridge over the Caen Canal is renamed Pegasus for the logo on the airborne uniforms, and the road leading to them is now named for Major John Howard.
For his leadership during the capture of the bridges, Major Howard is nominated for the Distinguished Service Order and presented with a medal by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery on July 16, 1944. The Gondrés continue to run their café, renamed Pegasus Café, to this day. Paraphernalia from the battle is displayed on their walls, including Major Howard's beret.
Pegasus Bridge is not as well known as many of the other stories of the Second World War, and yet it should be better known. The course of the Second World War hinged on the success and the incredible professionalism and determination of that small force of soldiers in capturing and holding that bridge.
Late 1944, as weary Allied troops edge ever closer to the German border, they can all but taste the end of the war. But before victory is theirs, the Americans will fight the single longest battle on German soil.
It's one of the largest, bloodiest battles of World War II, yet it's virtually unknown.
It makes no tactical sense. It would have been quicker to go around.
This was the wrong fight to pick, in the wrong place, at the wrong time.
Whole units are completely decimated, and the responsibility has to be laying at the door of the senior commanders who are sending these units in to carry out completely impossible missions.
It's called the meat grinder. So many lives are wasted ultimately for nothing, but very few people know anything about it.
September 1944. The Allied pursuit of the German army has slowed down due to the distance from supply lines and increased German resistance. Both the American and Russian armies have their sights set on Berlin.
The Soviets are coming in from the east. There's desperation on the part of the Americans and the Allies. You got to get to Berlin before the Red Army.
Waiting would have cost them. That was the logic in the fall of 1944, is that if we wait, you know, the Russians will be in Germany and even past Berlin, and we won't even be in the game.
From the western side, the next strategic objective is to move up the Rhine River and prepare to cross it.
The Rhine River is a deep, cold, wide river. Hitler is ordered that the bridges be blown up. You got to get to the Rhine before the bridges are destroyed. The other sense of desperation is this war is exacting such a horrific toll. Holocaust, civilians starving, soldiers dying on the battlefield. The sooner we can end the war, the better. But what General Courtney Hodges, who planned this, what he underestimated was the sense of desperation on the German side.
Commander of the German 7th Army, General Erich Brandenberger, favors falling back behind the Rhine River. But Hitler himself has assured him that reinforcements are on the way, and the Aachen region instead becomes increasingly fortified.
The US Army faces two problems in its campaign through the Hurtgen. One, this is the first time it's fighting on German soil, and however tough the Germans have been, they are bound to up their game when it gets to defending Germany. And the second problem is that they're up against a formidable defensive system in a terrain they simply have no experience of.
Located about 5 kilometers east of the German-Belgian border, the triangular-shaped Hurtgen Forest, known to the Germans as the Hurtgenwald, is 140 square kilometers of state-owned forest.
They're kind of straight lines because it's a managed forest, so, you know, even if you were trying to run and hide, the enemy can conceivably see you.
In 1938, Hurtgen Forest is fortified by the Germans as part of their western wall, known to the Allies as the Siegfried Line.
So it forms a near-perfect canopy under which you can build fortifications, under which tanks and airplanes are inoperable.
But the man in command has extensive experience fighting through difficult terrain. General Courtney Hodges is a decorated World War I veteran and well-respected commander.
Hodges definitely knew a lot about fighting this type of battle. He's partially blinded during the First World War. He gets a Purple Heart for that action, and he throws his Purple Heart out because he doesn't think he deserves it. This is the mentality of this man.
He comes from quite a well-to-do Georgian background. It would have been natural for him to go into the army as an officer, but he joins up as an enlisted man. And so for him to go from that to Lieutenant General in 1944 is really pretty impressive.
In August 1944, Hodges succeeds Omar Bradley as commander of the First Army. With 250,000 soldiers, it's America's largest fighting force, comprising 18 divisions, subdivided into brigades, battalions, and companies, all the way down to thousands of platoons of a few dozen men. On September 14th, 1944, the American 9th Infantry Division enters Hurtgen Forest. These few thousand men are the battle-weary 39th, 47th, and 60th Regiments, commanded by Major General Lewis A. Craig.
The 9th Infantry Division has been pretty battle-tested for a very long time.
Prior to Hurtgen, these units took part in long combat missions throughout North Africa and France and are severely depleted.
These battle-hardened troops have seen almost everything. They know what to expect, and now they're being pushed into the Hurtgen Forest.
Most military science says that you don't attack in a forest, especially an enemy who's very well fortified and well defended.
Which is the great conundrum for anyone who studies tactics. Why doesn't Hodges go around the forest is a question we still debate to this day.
It showed the American determination to advance. It told the Germans that they were not going to be able to scare the Allies away, no matter what they did. This was also a resounding message to the German high command.
This is the mentality of one of General Hodges' closest advisors. Fellow World War I veteran J. Lawton Collins has distinguished himself at the Battle of Guadalcanal, and he's earned the nickname Lightning Joe. When Hodges plans to halt for 2 days to allow reinforcements to catch up, Collins argues to begin recon immediately. He sets the pace of the offensive.
And they're sent into the Hurtgen to see who is in there, if anyone, and try to pierce out the other side and hit that Siegfried line.
The Allies enter the forest with several goals. Pin down German troops to prevent them from reinforcing their efforts further north at the Battle of Aachen, and capture the town of Schmidt.
It was like a crossroads town. You could fan out into the countryside, and it was a great place to have your communications as well. So Schmidt is a very, very important position for either side to hold.
The 39th and 47th regiments are ordered to divide and conquer.
A lot of military training is about following orders, doing what you're told, getting to where you need to be. You don't need to worry about what the goal is. You don't need to worry about exactly what's happening or what the overall situation is. Here is your job. So you're starting off in that type of mentality. As long as you and your mates survived another day, it was a good day.
The initial advance by the 47th Regiment goes smoothly.
In fact, for 2 days, they don't see anyone, and eventually they spot a staff car with a German colonel in it, and they kind of report back, this is what we've seen.
And they find a lone German officer trying to figure out what's going on. So what do these men do? They take him prisoner, they rob him, and then they send him back to the German lines. They don't even think they have time to deal with prisoners. The 39th attacks through the forest and meets resistance. They do not have as easy time as the 47th does.
The Germans have had time to recoup. They're back behind their own front line, and they are digging in. It's one giant booby trap, but you're probably not going to lay the booby trap right on the edge, the further western perimeter of the forest, are you? You're going to bed in behind your own lines.
The 39th Regiment begin pressing forward at Lammersdorf at the edge of the forest. But unbeknownst to them, they are entering a deadly trap.
The terrain and the forest itself is utterly impassable for the Americans to come in. The Germans had built defensive positions throughout, strewing mines all across the forest, building machine gun nests, bunkers.
They start taking casualties almost immediately. This makes them realize that this isn't going to be a cakewalk through this wood lot. They don't know where everyone is around them. They don't know where the enemy is.
The Germans do not expect the Allies' attempt to breach the Hurtgen Forest.
The Germans were dumbfounded as to why the Americans would do such a maneuver. They thought it was crazy, it was insane, and they could not believe their luck that someone would try this.
It must have seemed odd to them that this fortified forest, impregnable is what we'd call it, impossible to pass through virtually, is going to be the focus of an American campaign which up until that point had relied on armor, mobility, and aircraft. You can't use any of those three things in a dense forest. This is like a gift to the Germans. I'm sure they were surprised.
The density, the thickness of this forest also undermines the Americans in terms of communications. It's hard to see, and radar systems, more primitive radar back then, aren't working properly.
At one point, the only sound coming over the radio is a German warning of Achtung, Achtung, as the nearby town of Zweifel sounds their air raid sirens.
As soon as the radio goes out, you're in a feeling of isolation, that you don't have any support, that you're no longer part of the greater whole.
Radios tended to malfunction regularly. Sometimes the battery would die out, sometimes the signal wouldn't get over a hill. In fact, One officer said that he had to resort to the old hand signals that they were taught in basic training to move men around the field in front of him.
What began as recon has turned into a full-fledged battle. The Americans are on the defensive and woefully undersupplied.
Americans and the Allies have pushed in so quickly that they have outrun everything that they need. They don't have water. Some men don't have rations for days. You can't deploy men into a force if they haven't eaten for 2 or 3 days.
After 2 agonizing weeks, the 39th Division takes control of the town of Lammersdorf.
Huge losses for tiny gains, but the need to win, the need to advance was so overwhelming that these losses were deemed acceptable.
General Hodges has these objectives. He wants this town or this key intersection or this part of the forest. In hindsight, it seems rather arbitrary, and he is not willing to change his mind. The problem is at what cost? And the Americans are suffering thousands of casualties for each seemingly arbitrary objective.
By this point in the war, General Courtney Hodges expects the Germans to quickly surrender due to low morale. But this is absolutely not the case. The Germans have every advantage with the forest fortifications.
The way that I think most commanders would do it if they had a second chance was to wait until you had full concentration of your supplies and then to bring the brunt of your highly favorable ratio of soldiers and tanks and planes to bear and crush the Germans. It was a 5-to-1 tactical advantage in terms of military strength that the Allies had, and it's just wasted, utterly wasted.
The Battle of Hurtgen Forest is intended to build upon the successful push that began with D-Day. The Allies attacked the coast of Normandy in a massive amphibious assault of 150,000 soldiers. They faced resistance as they stormed the beaches, achieving victory, finally, on June 11th. This changes the tide of the war and provides the launchpad to liberate France and Western Europe.
We've got never-ending resources. It's just a matter of getting the resources up to the front. We've got almost 2 million Allied troops, match fit and ready to go.
The British Second Army liberates Brussels on September 3rd and Antwerp on September 4th. Hitler starts acting out in desperation. He appoints Field Marshal Karl von Rundstedt as the commander-in-chief of the German army in the West and orders him to attack the advancing Allies. Soldiers are called upon to fight to their death rather than surrender.
So many committed Nazis go on fighting right to the end, and I'm not just talking about the top like Goebbels, all the way down to the ordinary prison guards who will not let go of their authority and their murderous policies until literally the guns are taken from their hands.
With German forces decimated, their approach is more deadly the closer they come to defeat.
Hitler informed all of his commanders that if they gave up ground, many of them would be dead. You weren't supposed to give ground. You were supposed to hold your ground at all costs, especially when you got to the Siegfried Line, because that's German territory. So Hitler says that you will be killed if you fall back.
On the German side, it's desperate. There is no choice. You're probably going to die fighting, but you fight. Because if not, you're going to get a gun in your back, or you're going to be court-martialed and killed. And these little kids, and these older men, by now they're recruiting middle-aged men as well. They're going to damn well do what they're told. This is Hitler's Germany. You don't have a choice. You know, you dig in and protect your country.
The Americans decide to push through the northeast to capture the towns of Hurtgen and Kleinhau. But the number of American soldiers in the Hurtgen is quickly depleting, and the mood is grim. General Hodges calls in tanks from the 3rd Armored Division to support the 39th and 60th Regiments. The tanks must overcome fortifications known as Dragon's Teeth just to reach the embattled troops.
Armored divisions were trying to get into the forest to help out and support these American units, and men had to have axes issued to them from the sides of the tanks to go out and physically chop the trees down because the trees were too large for the tank to run over. And the tank couldn't run over any of them. So these men have to go out there by hand and chop down a road.
What was General Hodges thinking when he was deploying the tanks? It's not clear why such a decision was taken, but the tanks were a resource and they were deployed.
What you actually got in the forest of Hurtgen are tanks being stranded in mud, broken down, being knocked out, and becoming a problem. You know, the tanks are attracting fire and causing casualties. Far from them being the solution to the problem, they actually make it worse.
After you've lost a couple of divisions, you might consider rethinking the game plan. But the danger is you think, well, I've already lost 2 divisions, I'm just going to keep going. You know, I'm going to reinforce that defeat. It's a classic military error that so many make. Hodges ain't the first and he won't be the last.
Despite continued heavy casualties, by September 20th, the Americans reached the Weser Valley, closing in on their objective, the Schmidt hub.
Schmidt is like a merry-go-round. It's a kind of roundabout of death. All the villages, incidentally, have been evacuated. You know, you can't live there. It's not a place where you live any longer. It's just a bunch of rubble. It's just a place where you might get picked off by sniper fire. If a pillbox hasn't taken you out first, if you haven't stumbled over a dragon's tooth, I mean, the whole place is like a landscape of terror. Can you imagine? You come out of the forest and you land up in Schmidt. It's like, my God, who cooks up a place like that?
The planning for the German defences go back to 1938, when they construct the Siegfried Line. Now, it's not used, of course, for most of the Second World War because the Germans are on the offense. But when they do come on the defense, all these measures they put in place in 1938 suddenly come to fruition and are incredibly valuable. They've been building bunkers and pillboxes so that they create a kind of killing zone in which it's going to be very difficult for you to get past.
And yet, Hodges and other top brass all believe that Schmidt is an important town to capture.
The question is, how do you get there? You've got to come through the wood, funneling you into a field of fire in which you're going to find it very difficult to maneuver. The logic of attacking Schmidt gets completely removed when you think that a flanking attack could have done the same thing.
October 6th marks the Americans' first attack on Schmidt. Between October 6th to 16th, the 9th Infantry Division gains 3,000 meters at a cost of 4,500 casualties.
This is First World War numbers. This is losing a man for every meter and a half. It's a crazy number to think, how can this persist? How can you have all these losses and not see that we have a problem?
Bullets and tree shrapnel decimate the 9th Division.
Those kind of losses that the Americans absorb in Schmidt are monstrous. So you waste thousands of lives over a multi-day fight for nothing. Schmidt's important to the overall offensive on the Westfalen, but not at that cost.
The battle to take Schmidt is a failure, but despite the beatings, the Americans do advance to the crucial supply hub of Monschau. But again, they pay a high price. The 9th Infantry Division is reduced to a small fraction of itself and cannot continue fighting in the forest. On October 16th, the nearly obliterated 9th Division gets some relief. 1st Army Commander Courtney Hodges calls on Major General Norman Dutch Coda to renew the drive toward Schmidt.
The 28th Infantry Division arrives in Hurtgen, and they dive into the woods. These are men of the old Pennsylvania National Guard, and they are sent into the woods to try to break this stalemate. They think they're going to be able to do it. They're battle-hardened, they're ready to go. They get into the woods, and they see the destruction from months of terrible fighting. You are literally stepping on the bodies of men who died a week beforehand. It hits you in the psyche when you think about what these men are treading on, laying upon, being around every single day in the Hurtgen.
Fresh from his triumph at Omaha Beach, Dutch Coda has become accustomed to victory. But the German defenses here are surprisingly strong. Pillbox attacks proved to be deadly. American losses reached the thousands in a matter of days.
For those who were in Hurtgen Forest, the entire world is reduced to basically a green inferno, a meat grinder.
On October 18th, a battalion from the 28th Infantry Division arrives in Aachen as reinforcements. And after a brutal battle, the Germans capitulate on October 21st. After Aachen is captured, the 28th Infantry breach the Siegfried Line in the Stolberg Corridor. General Hodges' men are to press forward 10 miles to the Rohr River, capture the town of Düren, before continuing to Cologne and the Rhine.
The war at this point, from an Allied point of view, is we need the Germans to surrender. We need them to realize the war's over. If Germany doesn't have access to its industrial heartlands, then it's hobbled. It will have to capitulate. So that's a very clear, clean target, really.
So there is this huge push to move forward into the Ruhr. A lot of the power plants are located downriver. It runs Germany. If you can take out that area, you can seal off that asset. If you don't do that, Germany still has a lifeline.
But General Hodges continues to pursue other, less productive goals. He insists on repeated attempts to capture the town of Schmidt, an ongoing goal that is as elusive as it is deadly.
It becomes a sort of myopic obsession to capture it, and then guess what? To recapture it. You know, if you've got compromised supply lines, it's very difficult to hold a place like Schmidt. You're making incremental gains and you're losing them again. One step forward, two back. One step forward, two back. And it's losses on a scale that the Americans weren't used to.
On November 2nd, the Americans begin their second attack on Schmidt, led by the 28th Division.
There's no way that they didn't know how bloody and painful it was after the first group went in. If you were a new battalion coming in, you saw thousands coming back out as 300.
The Americans spent much of October in desperation trying to take this small village of Schmidt and suffered thousands of casualties. What do? They try it again in November.
On November 3rd, the 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 112th Infantry Regiment move across the Kahl Valley in hopes of capturing Kammerscheid and Schmidt and cutting the Germans off from their supplies. However, the terrain of the Kahl Trail makes movement of any kind very difficult.
One particular unit, 2,000 strong, is eventually battered down to just 300 men. You know, can you imagine a couple of days in which 70% are casualties? You know, how do you rebuild the morale of that unit? It's almost impossible.
After their first loss at Schmidt, the Germans rely heavily on panzer tanks. On November 4th, the 166th Panzer Division tanks unload their fire on the 3rd Battalion at dawn, ejecting them from Schmidt and leaving them unable to counterattack. The battalion descends into chaos. 133 are captured by the Germans.
And again, you have to remember the Germans have had time to fortify. They've got back behind their natural defensive barriers. They've been given time to regroup. They've laid their hands on anything they can that goes up in a puff of smoke. It's just do what you need to do. Keep them away. Stop them getting across. Keep them out of the fatherland, whatever it takes.
Meanwhile, the U.S. 109th Division is tasked with capturing the area north of Grimeter. But within 300 yards, they meet an unexpected horror.
I don't know that any minefield is a pleasant place to be, but that one was just horrific, almost impossible to navigate through. So navigating minefields, pillboxes, trench emplacements, heavy guns, all becomes a grinder. It becomes the meat grinder.
The Wild Pig, or Wild Sow minefield, is one of the largest minefields on the Western Front. Mines every 2 meters stretch over a span of 3 kilometers.
Now, how are you going to get through that? It's impenetrable. So they literally have to crawl through and try to find these mines, defuse them, and keep moving while being shot at.
Ultimately, they have to resort to rolling trees through the forest to try to detonate the mines. That's time-consuming, it's not practical, and in a forest that's this dense and thick of trees, it takes forever.
Even after all of those losses and that loss of territory, machines, men, materiel, it's still crazy that Hodges doesn't understand the totality of the loss. It is a loss at that time. How are you going to overcome that loss and go back at the enemy is another thing.
Ultimately, General Hodges comes to his senses and approves the withdrawal of American troops from this little hub, this little village of Schmidt.
With Schmidt lost yet again, the focus returns to the Ruhr industrial area and the Ruhr River. There are 7 dams at the Ruhr River headwater for flood control, drinking water, and hydroelectric power. The Schwalbenau and the Erf dams hold up to 40 billion gallons of water between the 2 of them.
That's a huge amount of water. I mean, if that had been released, it's a nightmare scenario. If the Germans had exploded the dams, the advance through Germany would have become not just difficult, but might have become a near impossibility.
On November 5th, General Hodges receives a top-secret memo from General Simpson of the 9th Army. He is to refocus on securing the Ruhr River dams before the Germans unleash a catastrophic flood. Hodges insists that the best path to get there is to continue to press through the deadly forest.
General Hodges yet again ignores the concerns of his officers and the intelligence that the Germans are considering blowing the dams to flood the entire region. His response is, damn the dams.
One of the justifications for going through the forest is to get to the Ruhr dams. There were 7 of them, and 2 in particular are so big in terms of the lakes that they've created that the feeling is if they're blown by the Germans, they're going to unleash a flood tide that's going to really slow down the advance to the Rhine River, and this is going to really impede Allied communication. So we need to get to these dams and we need to take them before the Germans blow them. But that doesn't explain the logic of going through the forest. Yes, the Ruhr dams are at the back of the forest, but they're not in the forest.
What I don't understand is why they don't go round to the southeast if you look at the map and then work your way downstream so that you incrementally pick off each dam that the Germans could have flooded you with.
Hodges created this sub-objective. I can do the dams, but I have to get to this point first. And that's where I see this real disconnect. When you're making a decision and you have a goal, you tend to plan to get to that goal. Most people want to plan to get to that goal with the least steps possible. Hodges is planning to get to that goal by adding additional intermediary steps. And the only reason that he's doing that is because those were the steps he took when he was successful in World War I. You take the towns, you move the line, and that's what he was trained in, that's what he was successful with, and that's what he's repeating here.
At age 57, Hodges is not the man he once was, mentally or physically.
Because of his disconnection from those around him, he's not hearing alternate plans or alternate viewpoints, which is leading into tunnel vision for his overall strategy.
Hodges, he misunderstands his soldiers. I think there's almost a kind of a failure of empathy at this point. For him to keep asking this of them and to not step back, it's a profound failure on his part, on a human level.
Hodges is an interesting character when it comes to casualties. He's very hard as a commander and likes to drive and keep moving and keep moving. But his men often say that they've watched him break down when he goes to the hospitals. Any other time, he's hard as a rock. But when he goes into the medical tents and sees the men, he breaks down and cries.
But meanwhile, the Americans are having a horrible time in the Kahl Trail.
Sending in tanks is not a good idea. It's an even worse idea when the weather conditions worsen. You get a lot of rain coming in. There's a morass on the floor of the forest, and the tanks are just incapable of moving and operating. You either got to get past them, you've got to go and rescue people out of them.
Amidst heavy casualties on both sides, a small glimmer of humanity comes from an unexpected place. German troop doctor Günther Stuttgen has a history of treating enemy wounded at his field hospitals. On November 7th, he makes contact with American medical personnel and negotiates what will become the first of 3 ceasefires. Combat stops for several hours, so wounded can be retrieved and enemy patients exchanged. Hundreds of men survive the Hurtgen Forest, who would have otherwise been left to die. Years later, Stuttgen was honored for his actions, which, he explained, came from respect that only soldiers who know the horror of war can have for one another. But in November '44, after the briefest of pauses, those horrors continue unabated.
The weather works to the advantage of the Nazis as well. It becomes brutally cold. It snows. The Germans laid thousands of mines down the Americans couldn't see or detect. So everything about the forest worked to the advantage of the Nazis and worked against the American invaders.
The American offensive force begins to be affected by a defensive mentality.
And they're going to be holding their ground, staying still, being in a covered position. You get that difference between being aggressive and offensive versus a very defensive type reaction where you're just trying to survive.
This reaction extends to some of the highest ranking officers. General Ralph Hübner leads the legendary 1st Division, known as the Big Red One. He makes the mistake, when reporting to Major General J. Lawton Collins, of using the phrase, keeping the enemy in check. Collins is furious at the lack of forward momentum and orders Hübner to ramp up the attacks. For Collins and his superior, Courtney Hodges, it's forward momentum or nothing. But by mid-November, there is plenty of blame to go around. And much of it is laid at the feet of General Norman Dutch Coda. His 28th Infantry Division is relieved of duty, and the 8th Infantry Division is brought in. On November 16th, Operation Queen begins.
The Hurtgen Forest campaign really occurs in a couple phases. The first one begins in September of 1944, and that's an unmitigated disaster. Finally, later in November, a second phase, Operation Queen, it's most of the same tactics, which again don't work. However, they want to try to use American air superiority, which ordinarily would make sense. But the forest is so dense, so thick, that it renders bombers and warplanes completely ineffective.
With no end in sight, the situation is reported on by one of the most celebrated writers of the 20th century.
Ernest Hemingway, reporting from the front for Collier's magazine, witnesses some of this fighting, and he's completely horrified.
Ernest Hemingway spent 18 days embedded with the 3,000 men of the 4th Division.
You have a kind of chronicler of the madness on a very personal level.
One of the grimmest actions is in late November when a regiment is sent to take the village of Grossow, and in attempting to do so, it loses almost 2,700 of its 3,000 troops. That's over 90% casualties.
And of the futility of the tactics being used by the Americans, Hemingway quipped that it would save everybody a lot of trouble if they just shot them as soon as they got out of the trucks.
And describes it as Passchendaele with tree bursts. That pretty much says it all.
You got shrapnel starting off the branches above your head, so if you're not hit directly, you're going to be hit with something raining down on you that's not just freezing wintry water from God's skies. I mean, it's a nightmare. It's hell on earth. He's reminding people back in America that this ain't just headlines. Oh, Paris, Antwerp, Brussels, Aachen.
The city of Aachen was so well restored that refugees from the nearby internment camp were allowed to return to their homes in the city. The military government section went to work, establishing order.
No, Passchendaele were tree bursts. You know, let's break up that narrative, that success story, and remind people success at a cost. Hemingway will eventually write a novel about what he witnesses. Across the River and Into the Trees, it's called.
A more direct literary account comes from a former professional wrestler, the machine gun platoon leader of Company G of the 121st Infantry.
That amazing character, Lieutenant Paul Bush, writes a great book about it afterwards. Incredibly visceral descriptions of what he'd gone through, what his men were going through.
Lieutenant Bosch's memoir captures the horror as he leads the 121st Infantry Regiment through the thick forest. Bosch sets up a command post and a carrying party to move rations, water, and ammunition for the regiment. German machine gunners catch them in a brutal crossfire, raining mortars and artillery. Bearing witness to the horrors of the forest, the 121st spends Thanksgiving in hell.
Thanksgiving in the Hurtgen is a lot different than what you see on any other part of the line. It is business as usual.
On November 23rd, Lieutenant Bosch receives a message that a hot turkey dinner is on its way to every man in the outfit.
They were looking to build morale, but it's also a way to remind people what they're fighting for. The world is going to be safe, and your family and friends are going to be able to have Thanksgivings because of what you're doing here.
Bosch objects. The positions they are in are nearly right on top of the Germans. A terrible time to eat a hot meal.
And they'll know where we are, and they're going to shoot at us, and let's stay low and keep safe.
Despite his protests and appeal to reason, the Thanksgiving dinners are sent in on orders from headquarters. Privates are called back to distribute the meals.
Hodges is playing for a headline game, really. You know, the men were fed on Thanksgiving, you know, as a note home to mom, you know, I had hot turkey or whatever it is you eat, cranberry sauce. You know, there's a kind of, there's a superficiality to his thinking there. Did he really think a gimmick like that was worth any life?
The Germans are lurking closely, and the hot meal service draws attention to Bosch's men. Seven men are wounded and 3 killed for a dinner no one wanted to eat. The 121st must move on after Thanksgiving in hell, but their journey deeper into the woods proves even more deadly. In only 3 days, the 121st Regiment loses 20% of their manpower, 50 killed, 600 wounded.
You've got mines going off, you've got trees exploding. How many times can you jump? How many times can you have that adrenaline rush before you've wiped it out? You just don't have the resources anymore to engage with it.
But throughout this vicious string of close-range firefights, Lieutenant Bosch leads his platoon in the village of Hurtgen, amidst heavy enemy fire. He and his men take cover in abandoned houses, while automatic weapons clatter and buildings explode. In a brutal struggle, Lieutenant Bosch and Company G managed to take the town of Hurtgen, taking 350 German POWs. Bodies of both American and German soldiers littered the streets. For his role in the strategic victory, Lieutenant Bosch is awarded the Silver Star, his second one. The victory at Hurtgen allows American troops to begin to make their way to the village of Kleinhau, the next objective. The 121st gains in Hurtgen finally placed the troops in decent proximity to the Rohr River dams, the objective all along of Supreme Commander Eisenhower. But the horrible cost to get there is barely reflected upon.
you've got this command structure. So there's this distributed lack of accountability for what's going on here. Nobody is saying, why are you doing this way? Even Eisenhower, who wants the dams protected, doesn't seem to get involved in how to get there. And maybe that's not part of his command. But somebody should have been tracking just how many lives were lost.
Instead of dwelling on the casualties, the First Army commanders seize on this momentum. November 29th, orders from General Hodges come in to take the Brandenburg-Verstein Ridge, securing a launch position for the U.S. First Army to make a direct attack and secure the Rohr River dams. After enduring weeks of heavy fighting, the 28th and 121st Regiments clear the approach for the tanks to begin their advance toward Brandenburg-Verstein. The 28th and 121st Infantry reach the ridge, but the Germans have a major defensive advantage: positions on Castle Hill.
Castle Hill is one of the high points of the fight, and that's with no pun intended, because Castle Hill is high, and it's a great vantage point.
With only 11 tanks and 140 infantrymen left, reinforcements are needed to protect hard-won American gains.
The 2nd Ranger Battalion shows up. Very good, well-trained troops.
And this is where you get into differences between special forces and general infantry, where there is more independence and decision-making, where you can adjust on the fly to meet a goal or objective without a very clear plan necessarily on how to get there. And so you find that special forces training tends to be very different in terms of initiative.
The 2nd Rangers begin their advance. They quickly overwhelm parts of the German defenses, and they will engage very violently and quickly with the Germans who are trying to defend Castle Hill.
The Germans fire on the Rangers with increasing intensity, but Company D takes the top of the hill.
The Germans were utilizing it to rain fire down on the Americans, and now it's in the hands of the 2nd Ranger Battalion.
Of the Ranger reinforcements, only 22 are still able to walk on their own after this battle. 19 are killed, 107 wounded, and 4 men are missing. But due to their sacrifice from Castle Hill, the Americans concede the Rohr River dams. On December 16th, the battered Rangers on Castle Hill are relieved by the 13th Regiment. But swapping special forces back to regular troops will prove costly.
And then they weren't using special forces. They were using standard infantry troopers who were trained to do what they were told, but they're doing it in an environment that is really biased against them.
The 13th are unable to hold on to this victory, but the struggle to control the Hurtgen Forest is about to be eclipsed by an even bigger challenge, and the Americans won't retake the hill until February of 1945.
One of the reasons the Germans fight as effectively as they do is because they are prepping for what will become the Battle of the Bulge, a position to the south of the Hurtgen Forest.
Of course, the bigger story is going to be the center of attention. The Battle of the Bulge became that center of attention.
December 16th, the Germans launched their last-ditch offensive into the Ardennes.
The Allied planners are completely caught off guard. They were not expecting this overwhelming German regrouping.
When Hitler orders the counterattack, the tanks concentrate their power in just one section of the line, which is an age-old military tactic. And if you can bust through that one section, it compromises the entire line. They pushed a bulge out roughly 60 miles in the American line, thus giving it the nickname, the Battle of the Bulge.
On December 27th, the 83rd Division in Hurtgen Forest enters the Battle of the Bulge.
Both sides sustain horrific casualties. It's also one of the coldest periods of the entire war. The weather claims lives also.
But in contrast to the Hurtgen Forest debacle, Allied forces are now well organized and well supported.
By Christmas, we've got our act together. You're even seeing a change in the law in Britain where women are drafted overseas. We need to back up the boys. You need to feed the boys. You need to supply the boys. You need to administer the boys. And that's what wins the Battle of the Bulge, is this extra manpower, this oomph. Eisenhower comes up to the front, you know, there's another 200,000 plus men. How can the Germans fight that?
Ultimately, Hitler's last-ditch gamble fails. The Americans win. That's really one of the last-ditch efforts by Hitler and the Germans to hold the American line.
The Battle of the Bulge is officially won on January 25th, 1945, but it comes at a high cost. Of the 500,000 Americans who fight, 19,000 are killed in action, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 or more are missing.
The Battle of the Bulge is a major turning point, and it is heroic. Churchill's right to call it a great victory, but you can't help but to think that at least in part, there's that horrible moment of Hurtgen Forest that kind of haunts them.
Finally, after 5 grueling months, there is still unfinished business in the Hurtgen Forest. On February 10th, 1945, at long last, the Rohr Dam is taken by the American forces. This gives them control of the Erf Dam and 20 billion gallons of water. However, the Germans rally around the Schwabenau Dam and blow the valves open to flood the area.
The Germans do exactly what Intel was hoping they wouldn't do. They blew the dams. But when the dams blew, it wasn't this overwhelming tidal wave of water coming down through the area like Intel thought it would be. It caused localized flooding. It slowed down some of the movements of divisions through the area, but it didn't cause this huge tidal wave of water. It was much ado about nothing for many of the planners.
On February 17th, the forest is cleared by the 82nd Airborne Division when they reach the Rohr River. The Americans are finally finished in the Forest of Hell, which claims between 35,000 and 60,000 soldiers missing, wounded, or dead. The Americans used their position at the Rohr to support an Allied attack on the city of Cologne. On March 7th, the Americans crossed the Rhine as their troops pushed forward to Berlin. 2 months later, the war in Europe ends. On May 8th, 1945, the war in Europe is officially over as Berlin is captured and Germany surrenders.
Hurtgen Forest is difficult when you think about the sacrifices made by the soldiers. On one hand, men died seemingly for nothing. But all this fighting, it did serve a role in the larger scheme of the Second World War. And ultimately, the Allies made it to Berlin and won the war.
What's most telling about this battle in terms of the embarrassment and the way which it was fought is the amount of space that Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, gave it in his memoirs.
It is a story of the Nazi defeat on the Western Front.
He devoted under 70 words to a battle that went on for 5 months and resulted in between 35 and 60,000 casualties.
Supreme Commander Eisenhower has political ambitions. He becomes the 34th President of the United States and lives to the age of 78. General Courtney Hodges continues to be held in high regard until he retires from the military in 1949.
I think history has diminished his narrative because he's not the hero that we've come to expect of great American military leaders. But I don't think we can put it all on Hodges' shoulders.
J. Lawton Collins continues in the military for another decade and survives to the ripe old age of 91. General Norman Dutch Coda is denied further promotions. He's eventually pushed out of the military due to failing health. Lieutenant Paul Bosch survives the viciousness of Hurtgen Forest. His memoir and other written accounts provides a tenuous connection to this largely forgotten chapter of history.
The entire history of the Second World War has many omissions. Hurtgen Forest is one of the most significant ones, and it should definitely be more studied and more understood by everyone.
For a lot of the men who came out of Hurtgen, it impacted them for years afterwards, where they would talk about the bursting trees, They would talk about the minefields or talk about losing a friend in Hurtgen. Why is that important? Why should we learn from this defeat of the U.S. Army? Look at the men who were on the ground. I think it would shed a lot of light on what warfare was like, how destructive it could be, and how when you go into something maybe with not as good a plan as you thought you had, that it could have disastrous consequences.
Bridge.